Hello friends, welcome to Sleeper Scientist. Did you know that nearly 80% of you watching my videos aren't actually subscribed? If you enjoy this content, I would truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel out immensely. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts down in the comments. By the way, where are you tuning in from today? Let me know below. The desert has a unique way of making you feel like you are the absolute last person left alive on Earth. I have traveled to many desolate locations in my lifetime, but absolutely nothing can prepare you for the profound emptiness that swallows you in the Nevada desert at night. It isn't just the darkness surrounding you, it is a darkness that entirely engulfs you. A silence so incredibly profound that it makes the sound of your own heartbeat resonate like thunder. My name is Evan Strickland. I was 26 years old when this nightmare occurred, and I have spent the last 11 years of my life desperately trying to understand it. I have officially told this story exactly twice before. Once to a military psychologist who instantly dismissed it as severe, fatigue-induced hallucinations. And once to my ex-wife, who looked at me as if I had completely lost my mind. Maybe I have. But Tessa Jordan was there. She witnessed absolutely everything I saw. And last year, after a solid decade of dead silence between us, she reached out. She had been having the dreams again. The terrifying ones where we are still paralyzed on that desolate road, still waiting, still helplessly watching the sky. She asked me if I remembered. I told her I have absolutely never forgotten. This is exactly what transpired on the night of September 14, 2013, on an isolated stretch of Nevada State Route 375, the desolate ribbon of asphalt they officially call the extraterrestrial highway. I was operating as part of a highly classified, small military convoy actively transporting equipment from Nellis Air Force Base to an undisclosed installation located northwest of Rachel, Nevada. I won't sit here and pretend to know exactly what payload we were hauling. That absolutely wasn't my job. My explicit duty was to drive the third heavy vehicle in the formation, a standard military transport truck, and to relentlessly follow the red taillights of the vehicle directly ahead of me until we reached our heavily guarded destination. There were exactly 5 vehicles in total: 2 lead trucks, my heavy transport, a support vehicle, and a trailing security unit guarding the rear. 12 military personnel, including myself. Tessa Jordan was stationed in the support vehicle directly behind my bumper. She was an advanced communication specialist, and one of only 2 women assigned to the convoy. We had spoken a handful of times during the tedious loading process back at Nellis. Nothing more than mundane small talk. She struck me as incredibly sharp, highly observant, the specific kind of person who routinely noticed the microscopic details everyone else completely missed. That trait would become profoundly important later. We officially departed Nellis at 2200 hours. The designated route was entirely straightforward. North on Highway 93, then banking west onto Route 375 until we hit the secure checkpoint. Total estimated drive time was projected at just under 3 hours. The first 2 hours were agonizingly uneventful. It was the exact kind of monotonous, hypnotic night driving that forces your mind to wander. The barren desert stretched out endlessly on either side of the asphalt, flat and featureless beneath a completely moonless sky. The stars, however, were absolutely incredible. Thousands of them violently scattered across the pitch-black void, looking exactly like someone had forcefully thrown handfuls of crushed diamonds onto black velvet. I vividly remember thinking that this must have been the exact cosmic canopy ancient civilizations witnessed every single night, long before sprawling cities and electricity allowed us to arrogantly drown out the universe with our own artificial light. I absolutely should have realized something was catastrophically wrong the exact moment my tactical radio began acting up. It initiated as mere static, just a faint, rhythmic hiss bleeding underneath the standard, mundane chatter between the convoy vehicles. At first, I simply assumed it was geographic interference bouncing off the mountains, despite the glaring fact that there weren't any significant mountain ranges nearby. Then, the static aggressively amplified. Coherent words started violently breaking up. Someone in the lead vehicle was desperately attempting to relay a message, but all I could catch were jagged fragments. Visual on, confirm position, the hell is. And then, absolute silence. Not the gradual, organic fade of a radio signal dropping out of range. It was a complete, instantaneous, aggressive silence. Exactly as if an unseen hand had reached directly into my dashboard and violently ripped the radio's voice out. I quickly verified my equipment. Everything appeared completely functional. I frantically tried switching communication channels, but every single frequency was entirely dead. Just that soft, empty, suffocating hiss that somehow managed to feel significantly louder than any actual sound. That is exactly when the entire convoy stopped. All 5 heavy military vehicles. At the exact, identical microsecond. Entirely without warning. I did absolutely not touch my brakes. I am undeniably certain of that fact. I have psychologically replayed this exact moment in my head thousands of times over the past decade, and I know that my foot never physically moved toward the brake pedal. But my massive transport truck violently stopped anyway. It was a perfectly smooth, highly controlled halt, exactly as if the machine had consciously decided on its own that this geographic coordinate was far enough. I looked frantically ahead at the lead vehicle. Its red brake lights absolutely weren't engaged. Neither were mine. We had simply ceased moving. In my rearview mirror, I could clearly see Tessa's support vehicle sitting completely motionless directly behind me, and behind her, the heavily armed security unit locking down the rear. All of us violently frozen in place on a desolate stretch of asphalt in the absolute middle of nowhere. Nobody physically moved. Nobody stepped out of their vehicles. For what psychologically felt like hours, but was mathematically probably only seconds, we all just sat paralyzed inside our cabs. Silently waiting. For what, I had absolutely no idea. Then, I looked up through the windshield. The stars were entirely gone. Not all of them across the horizon, just a massive, specific section of the sky directly ahead of our convoy. It was a perfect, geometric blackness that was significantly darker than the surrounding night sky, roughly shaped like a massive triangle. It was impossibly huge. Even from my limited vantage point on the ground, I could definitively tell it was eclipsing an area the size of several football fields. And it was moving. Slowly. Entirely silently. Effortlessly drifting directly toward our position, exactly like a massive storm cloud forged entirely out of solid shadow. I frantically tried to crank my engine. Absolute nothingness. The heavy truck was completely, irreversibly dead. Zero headlights, zero auxiliary power, zero mechanical response. The dashboard was pitch black. The tactical radio remained suffocatingly silent. Even the faint, structural vibration of the heavy diesel engine idling was entirely gone. I have operated vehicles that have mechanically broken down before. Engines stall. Heavy batteries die. It happens. But this was fundamentally different. This absolutely wasn't a standard mechanical failure. This was everything, all at once. Exactly as if an unseen entity had casually flipped a cosmic switch and forcefully turned off the entire world. I instinctively reached down for my holstered sidearm, acting more out of raw, primal panic than any actual tactical plan. What exactly was I going to do? Fire 9mm rounds into the infinite sky? But possessing the heavy weight of the weapon in my trembling hand made me feel marginally less helpless. That is exactly when I saw the light. It violently erupted directly from the massive black shape hovering above us. A singular, highly concentrated beam. Incredibly thin and mathematically precise, exactly like a high-intensity searchlight, but fundamentally wrong. The color spectrum was entirely off. It wasn't white, and it wasn't yellow. It was an unearthly hue resting somewhere in between, boasting a faint, sickly edge of blue that actually caused physical pain to look at directly. The impossible beam swept slowly, methodically across the asphalt, moving smoothly from left to right, brilliantly illuminating the desert floor as it passed. Jagged rocks, dry scrub brush, cracked asphalt. Nothing inherently special, just completely ordinary terrestrial ground. But here is the exact detail that made my stomach violently plummet. The brilliant light possessed absolutely no shadow. When standard light strikes a physical, three-dimensional object, it inherently creates a dark shadow on the direct opposite side. That is fundamental, basic physics. That is simply how light operates in our universe. But this specific unearthly beam aggressively illuminated the desert ground without casting a single microscopic shadow anywhere. The jagged rocks it smoothly passed over looked completely flat, two-dimensional, exactly like fake images painted directly onto the surface of the earth. I sat paralyzed, helplessly watching the impossible beam sweep closer to the convoy, closer to my heavy truck, closer to me, and then it abruptly stopped, directly ahead of our formation, perhaps 50 yards down the desolate asphalt. The beam held perfectly, flawlessly still. It wasn't actively searching anymore. It was waiting. I honestly don't know exactly how long we remained trapped in that paralysis. Time itself had become completely unreliable. I frantically checked my wristwatch. The analog hands were violently frozen at exactly 0:47 hours. Without any other working reference point, I possessed absolutely zero capability to mathematically measure the passage of minutes. It could have realistically been 5 minutes. It could have been an entire hour. What I definitively do know is that, at some point, the beam retracted. It didn't simply click off. It smoothly pulled vertically upward, retreating directly back into the massive black shape hovering above us, exactly like a striking snake withdrawing into its dark hole. And then, the massive, geometric shape itself began to move, rising vertically, ascending into the atmosphere, rapidly growing smaller against the infinite darkness of deep space. Within mere seconds, it was entirely gone. The brilliant stars instantly reappeared, all of them resting exactly where they mathematically should have been. The night sky looked completely, utterly normal, exactly as if absolutely nothing had ever violently blocked it. My heavy engine instantly roared to life on its own. Zero turn of the ignition key, zero grind of the starter motor. Just instantly on. The dashboard violently lit up, the tactical radio aggressively crackled back to life, and the lead vehicle ahead of me smoothly began accelerating forward exactly as if nothing anomalous had just occurred. The convoy seamlessly continued. Absolutely nobody uttered a single word over the tactical radio. Nobody frantically asked what the hell we had just witnessed. We simply drove in suffocating, terrified silence directly toward our classified destination. It absolutely wasn't until we officially reached the secure checkpoint 45 minutes later that I finally checked my wristwatch again. The hands were moving normally, but it clearly displayed 0:34 hours. 13 minutes earlier than the exact moment it had frozen on the road. I aggressively checked the digital clock embedded in my truck's dashboard. Same exact time. I leaned over and checked the checkpoint's secure computer system when we officially logged in. Same exact time. Somehow, existing in the void between the exact moment our convoy was violently paralyzed on that road, and the exact moment we resumed forward motion, we had completely lost 13 entire minutes. Or gained them. Or something entirely else. The math fundamentally didn't work. The timeline absolutely didn't make any logical sense. But absolutely nobody wanted to talk about it. The checkpoint security officer processed our 5 vehicles entirely without comment. Our commanding officer, a hardened major whose identity I will permanently keep private, simply walked up and casually asked if the sensitive transport had successfully arrived intact. When we firmly confirmed it had, he offered a curt nod and immediately dismissed us. That was it. 0 official debriefing. 0 incident reports filed. Absolutely 0 questions regarding why our entire highly classified convoy had been completely, mechanically stationary on Route 375 for an unknown, unrecorded period of time in the dead of the night. It was exactly as if the event had never occurred. Except it undeniably had. And I absolutely wasn't the only operative who knew the truth. I tracked Tessa down in the mess hall the very next morning. She was sitting completely alone at a far corner table, mindlessly stirring a cup of black coffee that had highly likely gone freezing cold hours ago. Her sharp eyes were dead fixed on something invisible in the middle distance. It was that classic thousand-yard stare you frequently witness on broken soldiers who have just survived something their brains fundamentally cannot process. I instantly recognized that specific look, because I was currently wearing it, too. I sat down heavily across from her, without asking for permission. She didn't seem remotely surprised. She didn't seem anything at all. Just completely, utterly empty. "You saw it," I stated. It absolutely wasn't a question. She looked up at me for a very long, agonizing moment, and I physically saw something shift deep behind her eyes. Relief, maybe. Or raw fear. Or quite possibly both. "I saw significantly more than that," she replied incredibly quietly. She cautiously glanced around the bustling mess hall, explicitly confirming we were relatively isolated, and then leaned intensely forward. "The beam of light," she whispered. "When it was methodically sweeping over the asphalt, did you happen to notice anything highly unexplainable about it?" I deeply thought about the impossible beam. The sickly color. The terrifying way it aggressively illuminated the terrain without creating a single shadow. "It absolutely didn't cast any shadows," I confirmed. She slowly shook her head. "No. I mean, yes, that is technically true. But that is absolutely not what I mean. I saw something entirely else. Something that fundamentally breaks reality." She paused, meticulously choosing her next words. "When the impossible light passed directly over the ground in front of my vehicle, I visually saw its shadow. I just stared at her blankly. The light's shadow. The physical shadow of the actual light itself. Burned onto the ground, actively moving in the exact opposite direction to the beam. I couldn't intellectually comprehend what she was saying. Light inherently doesn't possess a shadow. Light is the exact element that creates shadows. The abstract concept was exactly like claiming water possesses its own distinct wetness completely separate from itself. That is a physical impossibility," I stated. "I know." She looked down at her untouched coffee, and I clearly saw her hands were violently trembling. The beam was smoothly moving from left to right across the road. I was tracking it directly through my windshield. And as it swept past, I vividly saw a massive, dark shape on the ground rapidly moving from right to left. The exact opposite direction. Exactly like a dark reflection. But absolutely not like the light and its absence were two separate physical entities traveling independently. I desperately wanted to tell her she was simply exhausted. That the severe adrenaline and extreme stress of the chaotic situation had forced her brain to hallucinate. That the human mind, placed under crushing circumstances, routinely plays terrifying tricks on visual perception. But I had seen the impossible beam, too. I had helplessly watched it sweep across the desert floor without casting a single shadow against the jagged rocks. And I had violently felt that exact same, deep cosmic wrongness. That primal, instinctive certainty that what we were observing absolutely did not belong in any reality we understood. "Have you officially told anyone?" I asked. She offered a harsh laugh, utterly devoid of humor. "Who exactly would I tell? The Major? He would instantly have me confined for a severe psychological evaluation. My CO. He would effortlessly write it off as extreme fatigue and order me to get some sleep." She was completely right. The United States military fundamentally does not possess a protocol for this nightmare. There is absolutely no standard form to fill out when your classified convoy is violently paralyzed by an entity that explicitly exists outside the rigid boundaries of known physics. "What about the other operatives?" I pressed. "The rest of the convoy personnel. Someone else absolutely must have witnessed it." Tessa firmly shook her head. "I carefully tried probing Martinez this morning. He was stationed in the armed security vehicle directly behind me. I casually asked if he had noticed anything highly unusual during the night transport. He looked at me exactly like I was a lunatic, and confidently stated the entire operation was perfectly routine. Routine. Those were his exact, specific words. A routine transport. 0 incidents. I felt a massive block of ice violently settle deep into my chest. Because Martinez had been positioned behind all of us. He possessed an unobstructed, clear line of sight over the entire convoy formation. There was absolutely zero mathematical way he could have possibly missed the blinding lights, the massive shape eclipsing the stars, or the simultaneous, violent stopping of all 5 heavy vehicles. Unless he literally didn't remember. What about your vehicle's internal logs? I demanded. The GPS tracking data, the fuel consumption metrics, the engine telemetry. There absolutely has to be a digital record of the halt. Tessa's grim expression instantly informed me she had already checked. The digital logs show flawless, continuous forward motion from Nellis directly to the checkpoint. 0 stops. 0 mechanical anomalies. According to the official, encrypted record, we absolutely never pulled over. I sank back heavily in my chair, desperately trying to process this terrifying reality. The convoy had stopped. I knew it had violently stopped because I was physically there. I physically felt the massive truck come to a jarring halt. I stared directly at the dead, black instruments. I helplessly watched the impossible beam sweep across the asphalt. But the raw data explicitly stated otherwise. Either the infallible digital data was completely wrong, or our human minds were. And I was becoming terrifyingly certain it absolutely wasn't us. There is something else, Tessa added, lowering her voice until it was barely a whisper. When we finally reached the secure checkpoint, I manually checked the perimeter security cameras. The specific arrays that actively monitor the approach road. They are hardwired to record 24/7. Highly sensitive, motion-activated, boasting a continuous, secure backup feed. And there is a massive gap. A flawless, 13-minute digital void in the video footage, initiating at exactly 0:34 hours and terminating exactly at 0:47. The security system displays a generic error code for that specific period. It vaguely claims there was a localized power fluctuation. But the backup generators installed at the checkpoint run completely independent of the main power grid. They absolutely don't fluctuate. 13 minutes, Tessa whispered. The exact same 13 minutes that magically vanished from your wristwatch. Did you formally report the gap? I asked. I casually mentioned it to the security tech currently on duty. He blindly dismissed it. Claimed it happens occasionally, especially during heavy dust storms. Severe electrical interference. Advised me it was absolutely nothing to worry about. But there absolutely wasn't a dust storm. No, she agreed grimly. There absolutely wasn't. We sat in suffocating silence for a very long moment. Outside the heavy windows, the brutal Nevada sun was rapidly climbing higher, aggressively burning away the lingering cool of the morning. By noon, the ambient temperature would easily breach 100 degrees. The sprawling desert absolutely didn't care about the impossible nightmare we had witnessed. It just relentlessly kept being the desert. What exactly do you honestly think it was? Tessa finally asked. I had been agonizingly asking myself that exact same question all night long. I had meticulously run through every conceivable, rational explanation. Highly advanced experimental aircraft. Bizarre atmospheric phenomena. Some kind of terrifying, classified black-budget technology where the left hand of the military deliberately kept the right hand entirely in the dark. Absolutely none of them logically fit the parameters. Advanced experimental aircraft fundamentally do not remotely paralyze entire convoys. Atmospheric phenomena absolutely do not manifest as massive, geometric shapes that blot out the stars. And absolutely zero technology one knew of possessed the capability to flawlessly erase 13 minutes from wristwatches, secure digital cameras, and human memory. All simultaneously. I honestly don't know, I admitted heavily. but I firmly think we urgently need to stop talking about it." Tessa looked at me sharply. "What? Why?" "Because Martinez completely doesn't remember. Because the infallible digital logs explicitly don't show it. Because the secure cameras conveniently didn't record it. Whatever impossible entity occurred out there, someone or something, went to an incredible amount of trouble to guarantee there was absolutely zero physical evidence." I leaned aggressively forward, locking my eyes directly onto hers. "If they possess the power to flawlessly erase the proof, Tessa, they might decide to erase us, too." It sounded insanely paranoid. I implicitly knew it sounded paranoid. But in that highly specific moment, sitting inside a military mess hall in the middle of the scorching Nevada desert, completely surrounded by highly trained personnel who apparently possessed absolutely zero memory of the most terrifying event of my entire life, deep paranoia felt like the absolute only sane response. Tessa held my intense gaze for a prolonged, heavy moment. Then, very slowly, she offered a tight nod. "Okay," she finalized. "We absolutely do not speak about this to anyone." "Agreed." She stood up from the table, entirely abandoning her cold coffee. "Evan," she said, pausing mid-step, "what exactly happened to our 13 minutes? Where in the hell did they go?" I fundamentally didn't possess an answer. I still absolutely don't. All I definitively know is that somewhere suspended between that desolate, empty road and that heavily armed checkpoint, something violently took a massive piece of time directly from us. And in its void, it left behind terrifying questions that have relentlessly hunted me for over a decade. What exactly did they perform during those missing 13 minutes? What did they physically take? And why are we the only ones incapable of forgetting? I officially abandoned the military exactly 8 months following that night. It was an honorable discharge. I vaguely cited personal reasons on my separation paperwork, and absolutely nobody within the chain of command pushed back. By that juncture, I had already been heavily flagged for rigorous psychological monitoring after making the catastrophic mistake of vaguely mentioning the incident to a base chaplain. He had immediately reported my concerns, as he was strictly mandated to do, and suddenly, I was subjected to weekly, aggressive interrogations with a military psychiatrist who appeared significantly more interested in evaluating my mental stability than in actually investigating anything I had to say. I adapted rapidly. I learned exactly what specific words to deploy. Yes, the night transport was entirely routine. No, I absolutely didn't experience anything highly unusual. Yes, I completely comprehend that severe stress can force the human mind to fabricate illusions. No, I am absolutely not suffering from insomnia. That final statement was a massive, blatant lie. I absolutely hadn't slept straight through a single night since September 14th. Every single time I closed my exhausted eyes, I vividly saw that massive black shape aggressively eclipsing the stars. I physically felt the heavy transport truck violently paralyze without my physical input. I helplessly watched the impossible beam sweep across the asphalt, brilliantly illuminating the rocks without casting a single shadow. And occasionally, suspended in that terrifying, liminal space resting between waking and sleeping, I began remembering things. Jagged fragments. Raw images. Bizarre sensations that absolutely did not belong to any terrestrial moment I could consciously, logically recall. A massive, circular room featuring heavily curved walls that seemed to organically pulse with a faint, sickening bluish light. A clinical table. Freezing cold and impossibly smooth. It wasn't constructed of steel, or plastic, or absolutely any material I remotely recognized. Towering figures silently standing at the absolute extreme edges of my peripheral vision. Always frustratingly just out of focus. Always relentlessly watching. And the voices. They weren't physically speaking, exactly. They felt significantly more like invasive, alien thoughts that fundamentally didn't belong to me, aggressively pressing against the inside of my skull. Telepathically asking complex questions in a bizarre language that possessed absolutely no terrestrial words. I never disclosed those terrifying fragments to the military psychologist. I never disclosed them to a single living soul, because verbally speaking them out loud would have explicitly meant accepting the terrifying reality that they were genuine. And I absolutely wasn't mentally prepared to cross that threshold. I wasn't ready to accept that something horrifying had actually occurred during those deleted 13 minutes. Something that had been violently extracted from my conscious memory, but not entirely, flawlessly erased. So, I abandoned the military. I relocated to Oregon, secured a mundane job driving heavy rigs for a private logistics corporation, and desperately attempted to construct a normal, quiet life. I got married. I ultimately got divorced. I relentlessly kept driving. The sprawling Nevada desert remained physically behind me, but psychologically, it absolutely never left. I didn't hear a single word from Tessa Jordan for 10 solid years. When her message finally arrived, a completely cryptic Facebook request originating from a barren account displaying 0 profile picture and absolutely 0 mutual friends, I very nearly ignored it. I had meticulously spent an entire decade aggressively attempting to permanently bury Route 375. The absolute last thing my sanity required was a violent reminder. But something buried deep inside me forced my finger to click accept. Maybe it was raw, unadulterated curiosity. Maybe it was that specific, damaged part of my brain that had fundamentally never stopped agonizing over what had truly happened that night. Or maybe I just desperately needed validation that I absolutely wasn't completely alone in my nightmare. Her direct message was incredibly brief. "Evan, I've been having the dreams again. Have you?" I stared at those 8 words on my screen for a long time before I finally typed my reply. Yes. 3 days later, we met at a quiet diner in Boise, Idaho, roughly halfway between her home and mine. She looked older, gray threading through her dark hair, but her eyes remained incredibly sharp. We ordered coffee neither of us intended to drink. "Tell me about the dreams," she said. I told her everything. The curved, alien room pulsing with bluish light. The freezing, smooth table. The towering figures lingering just out of focus, and the telepathic voices asking wordless questions inside my skull. Tessa listened intently, then nodded slowly. "Mine are different," she whispered, "but exactly the same." She described standing in an endless, flat field covered in artificial grass that didn't move. The sky above her was a dead, uniform gray. She constantly heard rhythmic clicking sounds, exactly like massive machinery analyzing her. "But the worst part is the time," she added. "I dream for what feels like hours. But when I violently wake up, my clock shows only minutes have passed." We had both been experiencing these fragments for years. But Tessa had actively done research. She discovered that Route 375, the extraterrestrial highway, wasn't just a cheap tourism gimmick. She had unearthed a partially declassified 1970s Air Force report. A highway patrolman had experienced the exact same unexplainable vehicle paralysis we had. 6 months after filing his official report, he vanished from all public records. No death certificate. No address. Completely erased from existence. If they possess the power to erase the footage and the logs, Evan, they might erase us, too, she said. Then she dropped the bombshell. Last month, driving home at 2 a.m. on a desolate Colorado road, her car violently died. Complete electrical failure. 30 seconds later, it restarted on its own. When she got home, she checked the clocks. She had lost exactly 7 minutes. They absolutely weren't done with us. As winter turned to spring, the fragments intensified. The missing time escalated from minutes to hours. One morning, I woke up utterly exhausted and looked in the mirror. Pressed deeply into my temples were perfectly symmetrical, circular indentations. Not bruises. Geometric marks. By noon, they had completely vanished. I called Tessa immediately. "It's happening to me too," she interrupted before I could explain. She had woken up with complex geometric patterns burned into her shoulders. "It's a long-term study," she concluded grimly. "We are generations of lab rats." By August, the psychological weight became unbearable. I made a final decision. We drove back to Nevada. Back to Route 375. We parked my truck at the exact approximate geographic coordinate where our convoy had died 13 years prior. The desert was flat, endless, and waiting. As the stars emerged, Tessa pointed east toward the dark horizon. Look. At first, it was just a pinpoint of light. Then 2. Then 3. They weren't white or yellow. They burned with that exact same sickly blue-white hue that had haunted my nightmares. They didn't approach us directly. They began circling our position like predators assessing their prey. The telepathic pressure returned, violently spiking behind my eyes. The ambient hum escalated into a deafening, unearthly chord. My vision blurred. And then, I physically felt my boots leave the asphalt. I was levitating. Tessa was rising directly beside me, her body completely limp, but her eyes were wide open in a silent, agonizing scream. And then, just as violently as it initiated, it stopped. I slammed back onto the asphalt, catching myself against the side of the truck. The lights were gone. The sky was completely clear. I frantically checked my watch. We had arrived at 9:17 p.m. It now read 9:04 p.m. We had lost exactly 13 minutes. Again. Tessa was weeping. Not screaming, just silent, unstoppable tears. "Evan," she whispered, her voice shattering. I remember absolutely everything. I will not write down exactly what she told me next. Not because I don't remember. I remember every single terrifying word, but because some cosmic truths are vastly too heavy for paper. Some knowledge is permanently better left in the dark. But I will tell you this, we were absolutely never alone. And the lights, the missing time, the memory gaps, they weren't studying us. They were preparing us. We drove back toward Oregon in heavy silence. But her newly unlocked memories were already aggressively fading. "They're taking it back," she panicked, pressing her hand against the glass. The details were slipping through her fingers like water. But she retained the core truth. She had seen other humans in those rooms. Generations of them. Even her own ancestors. This wasn't a random encounter. It was a biological inheritance. We stopped for gas in a nameless, dead town. While Tessa was in the restroom, an unremarkable man in a gray jacket approached me at the pumps. His movements were far too smooth, too deliberate, exactly like something desperately trying to mimic human behavior. "Evan Strickland," he stated. "It wasn't a question. I'm not here to hurt you. I represent an agency that watches the watchers. The lights are just one single piece of a much larger picture." Tessa emerged and froze. The man looked at us with a completely empty smile. "The scientists studying you aren't just observing ants. They are studying something they consider highly promising." "Promising for what?" Tessa demanded. "That," the man replied, "is exactly what we are all trying to figure out." He casually tossed a blank white business card at our feet. It featured a single phone number printed in plain black ink. "When you are finally ready to learn the truth, call. But be warned, once you step through that door, there is absolutely no going back." Then, he was just gone. He didn't walk away. It was exactly like a violent glitch in reality. 1 second he was there, the next, empty space. We stared at the card on the concrete, the gateway to a truth we weren't sure we could survive. That was exactly 3 months ago. I am actively writing this testimony right now because the terrifying dreams have completely, abruptly stopped. For the very first time since September 14, 2013, I am sleeping straight through the night. 0 fragments. 0 missing time. 0 waking up in bizarre locations with unexplainable geometric marks burned into my skin. At first, I foolishly thought it was a profound relief. I thought the psychological door that had been violently cracked open was finally, permanently closing. My mind was healing. But Tessa fundamentally disagrees. She frantically called me last week, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "The dreams are completely gone for me too," she whispered through the phone. But, Evan, I absolutely don't think we are getting better. I think we are finally ready. Ready for what? Whatever comes next. That bizarre man at the gas station explicitly stated they were studying something highly promising. What if the clinical studying is officially done? What if we are finished? I thought deeply about that specific word. Finished. It could logically mean completed, or it could terrifyingly mean ended. Last night, I made my final decision. I picked up my phone and dialed the plain black number printed on the blank business card. It rang exactly 3 times. Then, a voice answered. It wasn't the man from the gas station, but it sounded terrifyingly familiar. Mr. Strickland, the smooth voice stated, we have been eagerly expecting your call. I demand answers, I replied, my voice shaking. Of course you do, and we fully intend to provide them to you. But first, we urgently need you to understand a fundamental truth. The road you are about to walk down possesses absolutely no return path. Once you know exactly what we know, you will perceive the world entirely differently. You will perceive yourself entirely differently. Many individuals who have reached this exact threshold have willingly chosen to stay in the dark. It is significantly easier, much safer, considerably less painful, but significantly less true. I thought about Tessa, about the paralyzed convoy, about the impossible beam of light, and the 13 minutes that had been violently ripped from our reality. I have spent 13 grueling years completely in the dark, I finalized. I am absolutely ready for the light. A heavy pause. Very well. There is a highly specific geographic location we need you to travel to in Nevada. You inherently know the road. My blood ran entirely cold. Route 375. Yes. Return to the exact coordinate where it initiated on the next clear night, at precisely 12:47 a.m. Why that specific time? Because that is exactly when the door officially opens. When the dimensional distance between here and there becomes thin enough to cross. Miss Jordan has already firmly agreed to attend. The secure line went completely dead. I am officially leaving tomorrow morning. Tessa is meeting me in Vegas, and we will aggressively drive the remainder of the route together. By the time anyone actually reads this document, we will have either successfully found our cosmic answers, or permanently become part of the unsolved mystery ourselves. I'm terrified. And terrified people leave traces of themselves behind, exactly like desperate messages stuffed into glass bottles, heavily hoping someone will eventually find them and truly understand. If you have read this far, I deeply hope you believe me. And if you ever find your vehicle violently paralyzed on a lonely road, if time ever unexplainably slips away from your reality, I urgently hope you know you are absolutely not alone. We are out there. Thousands of us. And whatever grand cosmic drama is actively unfolding just beyond the absolute edge of human perception, we are finally going to find out. The terrifying thing about flying high-altitude night ops over the sprawling Nevada desert is that you rapidly, aggressively stop trusting your own biological eyes. I have personally logged over 3,000 rigorous flight hours sitting inside the claustrophobic cockpit of an F-16, and I can definitively promise you that absolute darkness does highly strange things to human perception. The physical horizon completely disappears. You are forced to relentlessly rely on your digital instruments, because your human senses will violently betray you the exact millisecond you stop paying attention. My name is Riley Moran. I was a captain serving in the United States Air Force, officially stationed at a remote, highly classified base whose true name I am still legally not permitted to disclose. For the strict purposes of this account, I will simply call it Ridgeline. It sat roughly 40 miles northwest of a desolate town that absolutely does not exist on any standard civilian map, completely surrounded by nothing but pulverized sand, dry scrub, and suffocating silence. I am finally telling this story right now because 23 years have agonizingly passed, and forced silence possesses a nasty habit of rotting a man directly from the inside out. What specifically happened on the night of March 7, 2002, Fundamentally shattered absolutely everything I thought I knew about the skies, about classified evidence, and about physical reality itself. And Lydia Sharp, wherever she currently exists in the cosmos, profoundly deserves to have her final words heard. We are not alone. That is precisely what the general public expects a story of this magnitude to ultimately conclude with. Some explosive, cinematic revelation regarding extraterrestrial biological life. But that is absolutely not what Lydia wrote in her final, encrypted note before she permanently disappeared from Ridgeline Base. What she hastily scribbled onto a yellow legal pad left entirely abandoned on her desk in the radar analysis room was significantly simpler, and infinitely more terrifying. It's not us. 3 simple words. 0 surrounding context. 0 logical explanation. Just those 3 words underlined twice. But I am aggressively getting ahead of myself. Let me start with the flight. I was actively running a highly routine, mundane patrol along the extreme eastern perimeter of our restricted military airspace. It was a standard, uneventful nighttime sortie. The specific kind of flight I had successfully executed hundreds of times prior. Crystal clear skies. Visibility practically unlimited. The kind of perfect night where the Milky Way violently blazed across the dark expanse exactly like a flowing river of solid light. My official call sign was Viper 7. I was completely alone in the heavy aircraft, completely alone in the sprawling sky, accompanied solely by the aggressive hum of my jet engines and the soft, green tactical glow of my instrument panels. The very first subtle indication that something was fundamentally wrong triggered directly from my radar warning receiver, RWR. It was a brief, sharp chirp. The highly specific audio tone that typically indicates another aircraft has actively painted your jet with its targeting radar. That is entirely standard operating procedure when you are actively flying near heavily classified military installations. There are always advanced radars relentlessly sweeping the sky, actively tracking absolutely everything that moves. But this specific chirp was entirely different. It didn't mechanically repeat. It absolutely didn't cycle through standard frequencies exactly like a normal, terrestrial radar sweep mathematically would. It was just a singular, isolated pulse. Sharp, crystal clear, and then, absolute silence. I rapidly checked my tactical instruments. Absolutely nothing registering on my own onboard radar. 0 physical contacts within a 50-mile radius. The airspace actively surrounding my jet was completely, undeniably empty. Ridgeline Control, this is Viper 7, I radioed over the secure frequency. Did you just actively paint me? A heavy pause. Then, the calm voice of the senior controller currently on duty, a brilliant woman whose name I later discovered was Lydia Sharp. Negative, Viper 7. We show you operating entirely alone in your designated sector. 0 other traffic. Copy that, Control. I received a singular RWR chirp approximately 30 seconds ago. Just officially confirming. Understood, Viper 7. We will actively check our digital logs. Stand by. I patiently waited. The brilliant stars wheeled slowly overhead as I meticulously maintained my patrol pattern, flying a lazy, elongated oval at exactly 25,000 feet. The vast desert positioned directly below me was an endless ocean of darkness, violently broken only by the occasional, isolated cluster of lights marking a classified installation. Viper 7, Ridgeline Control, go ahead. We are currently showing absolutely 0 radar activity on your exact coordinates at that specific time. Must have been a highly localized glitch in your onboard system. Copy, Control. Probably right. But I implicitly knew it absolutely wasn't a mechanical glitch. I had been flying advanced fighter jets long enough to easily distinguish the stark difference between a random equipment malfunction and a genuine, physical contact. That specific chirp had been undeniably real. Something unseen had actively pinged my aircraft. Something that was currently operating completely invisible to the base's multi-million-dollar radar arrays. I forcefully pushed the nagging thought aside and seamlessly continued my patrol. 10 minutes slowly passed. Then 15. The hypnotic monotony of high-altitude night flying settled comfortably back over me, exactly like a familiar, heavy blanket. And then, I physically saw it. At first glance, my brain rationalized it was merely a bright star. Just another luminous point of light buried among the thousands already aggressively scattered across the sky. But stars fundamentally do not move. And this specific light was moving. Slowly. Consistently. Effortlessly tracking a trajectory roughly, flawlessly parallel to my own. I cautiously adjusted my heading slightly, banking the F-16 directly toward the anomaly to secure a superior visual. As I executed the maneuver, I noticed a terrifying detail that instantly made my stomach violently drop. The light was actively pacing me. When I banked, it flawlessly banked. When I aggressively accelerated, it instantly accelerated. Whatever this impossible entity was, it was mathematically maintaining a constant, unbroken distance from my jet. Maybe 2 miles. Maybe slightly less. Close enough to visually confirm, vastly too far to accurately identify. Ridgeline control, Viper 7. I have a direct visual on an unidentified luminous object bearing 045 relative, approximately 2 miles out. Do you have absolutely anything on radar? Another pause. Significantly longer this time. Negative, Viper 7. We are showing absolutely 0 contacts operating in your vicinity. Control, I am physically looking right directly at it. It is definitively there. Can you accurately describe it? I stared intensely at the light, desperately trying to rationally process exactly what I was observing. It absolutely wasn't a conventional aircraft. There were 0 standard navigation lights. 0 required anti-collision strobes. 0 discernible physical structure extending beyond the pure light itself. It was just a steady, unrelenting glow, shining a slightly sickly yellowish hue exactly like an antique incandescent bulb. It is a singular light source. 0 physical structure visible. 0 strobes or FAA markers. It is currently moving perfectly parallel to my course, flawlessly matching my exact speed. Viper 7, can you aggressively close the distance for a superior visual? I heavily hesitated. Every single biological and tactical instinct I possessed was violently screaming at me to maintain a safe distance. To clinically observe and report. To absolutely not engage with a physics-breaking entity I fundamentally didn't understand. But I was an elite fighter pilot. And pilots are intensely, dangerously curious by nature. We absolutely detest unsolved mysteries. Roger. Control. Actively closing to investigate. I aggressively pushed the heavy throttle forward, physically feeling the deeply familiar, violent surge of raw acceleration as the F-16 instantly responded. The luminous entity hovering ahead of me absolutely didn't change its trajectory. It didn't attempt to flee. It didn't aggressively approach. It didn't mechanically react in any conceivable way to my sudden movement. And then, as I rapidly closed the gap, something happened that I fundamentally still cannot scientifically explain. The light aggressively started to grow. Not like a standard aircraft visually getting closer. Not like a star organically expanding as you alter perspective. It was infinitely more like watching a massive balloon violently inflate. A slow, terrifyingly steady, exponential increase in sheer size that possessed absolutely nothing to do with physical distance or optical perspective. Within mere seconds, the singular point of light had impossibly grown from a tiny dot into a massive, solid disk. A blinding disk that completely filled an incredibly uncomfortable portion of my forward canopy view. A massive disk that was, I abruptly, terrifyingly realized, parked directly in my active flight path. I violently yanked back on the control stick, aggressively throwing the F-16 into a punishing, sharp vertical climb. The crushing G-forces violently pinned me deep into my seat as the jet's nose rocketed upward, my altimeter spinning wildly as I desperately attempted to put physical distance between my aircraft and whatever impossibility was hovering in the darkness directly ahead. And then, the massive light passed directly beneath me. I caught a terrifying, fleeting glimpse of it as I violently climbed. Just a fraction of a microsecond. But it was just long enough for my brain to fully register exactly what I was witnessing. It was a shape that absolutely wasn't quite circular. It wasn't quite anything. Its outer edges seemed to violently blur and aggressively shift, exactly like looking at an object resting behind intense thermal heat shimmer. And silence. Complete, absolute, impossible silence. At 25,000 feet, sitting inside a multi-million-dollar fighter jet screaming violently through the atmosphere at nearly 500 miles per hour, there is always deafening sound. The roar of the engines, the aggressive wind buffeting the hull, the 1,000 microscopic mechanical vibrations of a machine in heavy flight. But for that singular, terrifying moment, that fraction of a second as the unearthly light passed directly beneath my fuselage, there was absolutely nothing. Zero sound at all. Exactly as if some massive cosmic entity had reached its hand directly into the fabric of the universe and violently turned off the volume. And then, it was entirely gone. I leveled the aircraft off, my hands violently shaking on the flight controls, my heart hammering desperately against my ribs. The airspace actively surrounding me was completely empty once again. The stars were back. The deafening, familiar roar of my jet engines aggressively flooded the cockpit exactly like an old friend returning. Ridgeline Control, this is Viper 7. My voice was shockingly steadier than I logically expected. Go ahead, Viper 7. I just experienced a highly close proximity pass with that unknown anomaly. Incredibly close. It effortlessly went directly under my hull. Say again, Viper 7? Something physically just passed directly beneath my aircraft. Zero collision, zero structural damage, but it was absolutely right there. Control. Right directly beneath me. Absolute dead silence on the encrypted radio frequency. A profoundly long, highly uncomfortable silence. Then, Viper 7. We are actively showing absolutely zero contacts on our radar arrays. I repeat, zero contacts. Are you entirely certain of exactly what you observed? I deeply thought about that specific question. Was I certain I had physically seen something? I had undeniably, violently felt the impossible absence of sound. I had helplessly watched a light organically grow and effortlessly maneuver in ways that fundamentally defied the rigid laws of terrestrial physics. But what exactly could I report that wouldn't make me sound like I had suffered a catastrophic psychological breakdown mid-flight? Control. I am absolutely certain I visually observed something. Whether your advanced radar actively confirms it or not, something was absolutely out here with me. Another heavy pause. Then, an entirely different voice breached the comms. Male this time. Considerably older, possessing the cold, clipped, authoritative tone of someone commanding immense power. Viper 7, this is Colonel Harrison. You are ordered to return to base immediately. Do absolutely not discuss the contents of this transmission with any personnel until we have had an official opportunity to heavily debrief you. Acknowledge. Acknowledged. Colonel. Viper 7 RTB. I banked the aircraft heavily toward home, aggressively leaving the empty sky physically behind me. But even as I flew the jet, I fundamentally couldn't shake the terrifying, primal feeling that I absolutely wasn't alone. That something massive, ancient, and entirely unexplainable was absolutely still out there in the dark. Watching. I officially touched down at Ridgeline Base at exactly 3:47 hours. The exact millisecond my heavy landing gear violently kissed the tarmac, I inherently knew everything was fundamentally different. The standard nocturnal ground crew was actively holding position, but so were three massive, pitch-black SUVs aggressively parked directly near my designated hangar. Men clad in sharp, dark suits stood completely motionless beside them, their cold eyes relentlessly watching my F-16 taxi in with blank expressions that explicitly gave absolutely nothing away. Colonel Harrison was physically waiting for me on the tarmac. He was a towering, imposing figure, graying at the temples, possessing the hardened face of a military man who had undeniably seen vastly too much and spoken terrifyingly too little. Directly behind him, the suited men waited in suffocating silence. "Captain Moran," Harrison stated grimly as I climbed down the ladder from the cockpit. "Good to have you back safe." "Thank you, sir. We are going to strictly need to debrief you immediately." "Of course, sir. I expected as much." He offered a tight nod, but there was something dark lurking deep in his eyes that I fundamentally didn't like. It wasn't raw suspicion. It was significantly closer to deep, unadulterated concern. The exact specific brand of concern you vividly see on a surgeon's face right before they deliver terminal news. "These gentlemen are officially from the Office of Special Investigations," he stated, gesturing coldly toward the suits. "They possess several highly specific questions for you." I spent the next 4 agonizing hours trapped inside a suffocating, windowless concrete room, meticulously recounting every single microscopic detail of my flight. The initial chirp on my RWR, the unearthly light that effortlessly paced my jet, the terrifying, close proximity pass, the impossible, physics-breaking silence, the profound moment when the entire universe seemingly held its breath. They clinically recorded absolutely everything. They took meticulous, aggressive notes. They forcefully demanded I describe the exact same chronological events over and over again, from vastly different angles, relentlessly hunting for any microscopic inconsistencies, actively searching for any subtle signs of hallucination, fabrication, or severe psychological delusion. I gave them absolutely nothing but the cold, impossible truth. When the grueling interrogation was finally concluded, the lead investigator, a man possessing absolutely no name tag and zero human expression, leaned aggressively across the metal table. "Captain Moran, we are going to strictly require you to sign a highly classified non-disclosure agreement regarding tonight's specific events. I assume you expected as much." "Yes. You completely understand that discussing this anomaly with absolutely anyone, family, close friends, or fellow commanding officers, would constitute a severe, catastrophic violation of national security protocols?" "I completely understand." "Good." He coldly slid a heavy, classified document across the steel table. "Sign right here." I aggressively signed it. As I finally exited the interrogation room, Colonel Harrison was silently waiting for me alone in the dimly lit corridor. "Captain," he said incredibly quietly, "a stern word of advice." "Sir." "What exactly you witnessed up there tonight, or what you think you witnessed, it absolutely isn't the first time. And I guarantee it won't be the last. The absolute best thing you can physically do is aggressively forget about it. Move on. Do not go relentlessly hunting for answers you are fundamentally not cleared to find." I locked eyes with him, searching his weathered face. "Has this exact anomaly happened before, sir? To other pilots? Other localized sightings?" He didn't offer a single word of confirmation. He merely looked at me with that exact same, terrifying expression of guarded concern. Then, he abruptly turned on his heel and walked away into the shadows. Logically, I absolutely should have taken his advice. I should have blindly signed my gag order, quietly filed my redacted report, and gone straight back to flying mundane patrol missions exactly as if nothing impossible had ever occurred. But I fundamentally couldn't stop obsessing over the silence. That terrifying microsecond when the light passed directly beneath my fuselage and the entire physical world went completely mute. It absolutely wasn't natural. It was a biological and physical impossibility. Massive sound simply doesn't just cease to exist. Not sitting inside the cockpit of a screaming fighter jet. Not ripping through the thin atmosphere at high altitude. Not anywhere in the entire physical universe as modern science understood it. And yet, it had undeniably happened. I was still aggressively obsessing over it 3 days later when I formally met Lydia Sharp. The primary radar analysis station was physically located inside a highly secure, detached building situated on the absolute far edge of the base. It was a squat, brutalist concrete structure boasting 0 windows and a single, heavily reinforced steel door. Base security strictly required 2 distinct forms of classified ID and a biometric thumbprint scan just to breach the lobby. Lydia was operating as the senior analyst on duty when I finally arrived. She was surprisingly younger than I had initially anticipated, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair pulled back into a severely practical ponytail. But her eyes were extraordinary. They were the specific kind of hypervigilant eyes that seemed to actively process absolutely everything in the room simultaneously. The kind of eyes that effortlessly noticed microscopic details everyone else entirely missed. "Captain Moran," she stated immediately when I introduced myself. "You're the Viper 7 pilot from the other night." That's exactly right. I was heavily hoping I could secure a brief look at the raw radar logs from my specific flight. She raised a highly skeptical eyebrow. "The OSI investigators aggressively pulled those digital files 3 days ago. They are permanently classified now." I inherently know that. But I desperately thought maybe there was something microscopic they missed. Something that might mathematically help me understand exactly what I survived. Lydia intensely studied my face for a very long, heavy moment. I fundamentally couldn't read what she was internally calculating. Her face gave absolutely nothing away. But something buried in my desperate expression must have convinced her, because finally, she offered a tight nod. "Okay," she whispered. "But absolutely not in here. There are far too many secure cameras." She cautiously glanced at the reinforced door. "Meet me at the abandoned North Observation Tower in exactly 1 hour. Bring black coffee." The North Observation Tower was a derelict, rusting structure towering on the extreme outer perimeter of the base. It was a decaying relic from a forgotten era when the military actually believed visual, human observation was still a viable method for monitoring classified airspace. Now, it just sat entirely empty, slowly rusting into oblivion, completely forgotten by everyone except the occasional perimeter maintenance crew. Lydia was already physically there when I arrived, sitting quietly on the rusted metal steps, her glowing laptop perfectly balanced on her knees. The sprawling Nevada night stretched out infinitely around us, freezing cold and crystal clear. The stars violently blazed overhead, acting exactly like silent witnesses to our illegal conspiracy. I handed her a heavy thermos of coffee. She poured herself a steaming cup entirely without comment. I aggressively pulled the raw files mere minutes before the OSI investigators could completely lock the servers down, she stated flatly. I successfully made a fully encrypted copy, which is highly likely a severe court-martial offense. She offered a grim shrug. But I desperately needed to understand. Understand what exactly? She smoothly turned the glowing laptop screen directly toward me. It displayed a highly complex, digitized radar interface. A deeply familiar pattern of sweeping concentric circles, featuring a central coordinate marking our military installation. A singular, bright green blip moved steadily across the black display, flawlessly tracing the exact patrol route I had flown that night. "That is exactly you," Lydia stated, pointing a finger at the blip. "Viper 7. I possess continuous, unbroken tracking data from the exact millisecond you took off to the exact moment your wheels touched the runway." "Okay. Now, watch this very closely." She aggressively pressed a key, and the digital display violently jumped forward in time. The glowing timestamp proudly read 2:31, exactly 14 minutes after my initial RWR chirp. The approximate time frame I had initiated my aggressive intercept on the unknown light. "Right there," she whispered. At first glance, I fundamentally didn't see anything unusual. It was just my green blip moving steadily across the display. But then, I violently noticed something lurking at the absolute edge of the screen. A faint, impossible shimmer. Exactly like intense thermal heat distortion radiating off a baking summer highway. It was a localized patch of digital static that moved with terrifying, mathematical purpose. "What in the hell is that?" I asked, my voice tight. "That is exactly what I have been obsessively trying to figure out." Lydia aggressively zoomed in on the visual shimmer. "It absolutely isn't a normal, terrestrial radar return. It is significantly more like a localized absence. A literal hole ripped directly into the raw data. A hole. The massive radar beam is physically bouncing back from absolutely everything else in the sky. The desert ground, even microscopic dust particles suspended in the atmosphere. But this highly specific spot right here. It is exactly as if our radar beam goes directly in and completely refuses to come back out. Exactly as if something massive is actively, aggressively absorbing the electromagnetic energy." I stared intensely at the frozen display, desperately trying to intellectually make sense of what I was witnessing. The digital shimmer was flawlessly tracking alongside my blip. It was mathematically maintaining that exact same 2-mile distance I had physically observed from my cockpit. "It was actively pacing me," I stated. "Exactly like I officially reported." "Yes. But here is exactly where it gets fundamentally terrifying." She aggressively pressed another key. The display violently jumped forward again to 2:34. The exact, precise moment of my close proximity pass. The anomaly was now positioned directly beneath my green blip. They were so incredibly close that the two radar returns practically merged into one. And then, as I helplessly watched the screen, my green blip violently flickered. It didn't completely disappear. It aggressively flickered. Exactly like a dying light bulb struggling with a catastrophic electrical connection. "I have absolutely never seen anything remotely like that in my entire career," Lydia stated quietly. "Your encrypted transponder, your physical radar reflection, even your jet's entire electronic signature. Absolutely everything blinked completely out of existence for exactly 0.7 seconds. And then, it instantaneously came back." "The silence," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "What?" "When that impossible thing passed directly under my hull, absolutely everything went dead silent. Just for a fraction of a second. Exactly like the entire universe aggressively paused." Lydia's eyes went incredibly wide. "You are explicitly stating that you physically experienced a sensory anomaly at the exact same, precise instant your multi-million-dollar instruments went completely dark?" "Yes. Exactly." She sat back heavily on the rusted stairs, her face stark pale, illuminated by the glow of the laptop screen. "That absolutely shouldn't be scientifically possible. Biological sound and advanced radar are two completely different, isolated phenomena. One is mechanical, acoustic vibration. The other is pure electromagnetic radiation. There is absolutely zero physical mechanism in the known universe that could logically affect both systems simultaneously. I implicitly know exactly what I experienced up there. I am absolutely not doubting you." She forcefully shook her head. "I am just explicitly stating that whatever entity executed this, it fundamentally operates on physical principles we absolutely do not comprehend. It violently affected your biological senses and your hardened aircraft systems at the exact identical microsecond. Exactly as if it physically exists on an entirely different level of cosmic reality. And it merely touched ours briefly." We sat in freezing silence for a long moment, both of us intensely staring at the frozen radar display. The impossible shimmer hung there. A terrifying patch of nothingness completely surrounded by everything. Impossible, yet utterly undeniable. "There is something else," Lydia stated finally. "More." I aggressively enhanced the raw audio log extracted from that specific 0.7-second gap. It is standard operating procedure when analyzing severe anomalies. You ruthlessly filter out the background noise, massively amplify the core signal, and verify if there is absolutely anything hidden deep inside the data. She rapidly pulled up another encrypted file. A jagged audio waveform violently appeared on the screen, a perfectly flat line randomly punctuated by occasional, microscopic spikes. This is exactly what the radar array recorded during that specific moment of silence. Normally, you would mathematically expect standard static, random background noise. But I need you to listen to this. She pressed play. At first, there was absolutely nothing. Just the empty, suffocating hiss of pure electronic silence. But then, incredibly faintly buried beneath the static, breathing. Slow, rhythmic, unmistakably, terrifyingly organic. The undeniable, heavy sound of something massive physically drawing air into lungs and slowly releasing it again. In, out, in, out. It lasted for exactly 0.7 seconds. Then it abruptly, violently stopped, immediately replaced by the standard, mundane noise of the radar array. That is physically impossible, I stated, my blood running cold. I know. Radar absolutely does not record biological sound. It is a completely different. I know. Lydia's voice was violently strained. But there it is. Something massive. Actively breathing. Flawlessly recorded on a highly advanced military system that possesses absolutely no microphone, zero audio input capability, and fundamentally zero way of successfully capturing sound at all. I demanded she play the recording again. The heavy breathing was significantly clearer this time, now that my brain explicitly knew exactly what to listen for. There was something almost terrifyingly peaceful about it. Something incredibly patient. Something that was deeply, endlessly waiting. What exactly does this mean? I asked into the dark. Lydia forcefully closed her laptop, her face drawn and haunted. I honestly don't know, she stated. But I am absolutely going to find out. Over the next 2 grueling weeks, Lydia Sharp became completely, utterly obsessed. I strategically stopped by her isolated radar station whenever I could manufacture a valid excuse. Casually checking on classified flight data, officially reviewing navigation charts, the kind of mundane, routine tasks that wouldn't immediately raise red flags with command. But in reality, I was strictly there to see her, to desperately find out exactly what she had uncovered. Each successive time I visited, she looked significantly worse. Darker, heavier circles bruising the skin under her eyes. A violent, uncontrollable tremor in her hands that absolutely hadn't been there before. She wore the deeply haunted look of someone who was relentlessly seeing things they fundamentally couldn't unsee. I have been aggressively tearing through the physical archives, she told me one night, exactly a week following our clandestine meeting at the observation tower. I am meticulously pulling every single anomalous radar contact officially documented over the past 30 years. Exactly how many are there? Vastly more than you would think. She gestured tiredly toward a massive stack of heavy files dominating her desk. Actual, decaying paper files, the specific kind that vastly predated digital encrypted records. And every single one of them shares the exact same, impossible pattern. The digital shimmer. The localized absence of reality. The precise 0.7-second gaps. All of them. Every single one. Wildly different dates, completely different geographic locations, different aircraft. But the cosmic signature is completely identical. Exactly as if it is the exact same entity relentlessly returning over and over again. I cautiously picked up one of the heavy files. It was officially dated 1978. A heavily redacted report from a fighter pilot describing a terrifying close proximity encounter over restricted airspace. The military language was different, the terminology decidedly older, but the core description was completely unmistakable. A light that paced me, the unnamed pilot had written. No sound. No shape. Just presence. They have implicitly known about this impossible phenomenon for decades, I stated, my blood running cold. Significantly longer than that. Lydia aggressively pulled out another file. This one was heavily yellowed and brittle with age. This is officially from 1952. The exact same signature. The exact same gaps. And the exact same biological breathing hidden on the audio enhancements. Breathing. Every single classified recording containing a data gap contains the exact same audio, she whispered. Heavy breathing. Slow. Rhythmic. Exactly like something incredibly massive is either deeply sleeping or patiently waiting. I physically felt a violent chill run straight down my spine. Waiting for what? Lydia didn't offer an answer. She just stared blankly at the decaying files, at the decades of suppressed evidence that had been meticulously collected, aggressively classified, and permanently forgotten. There is something else, she finally stated. Something I unexpectedly found last night. She aggressively pulled up a classified file on her computer. It absolutely wasn't a digital radar log this time. It was a photograph. Highly grainy, black and white, clearly captured from a massive distance. It depicted a desolate stretch of desert highway, completely empty except for a singular military vehicle parked heavily on the shoulder. This was taken in 1967, Lydia explained. A completely routine surveillance photo from an automated base perimeter camera. Absolutely nothing unusual about it, except for this. She aggressively zoomed in on the parked vehicle. Standing completely still beside it was a solitary figure. A young man clad in a military uniform, his head tilted back, staring intensely up into the night sky, and hovering directly above him, barely visible against the dark, grainy background, was a terrifyingly familiar smudge of light. The shimmer, I breathed. Yes, but that absolutely isn't what secured my attention. She violently zoomed in further, aggressively focusing directly on the young man's face. The pixel resolution was terrible, but something regarding the sharp facial features was undeniably, horrifyingly familiar. That is Colonel Harrison, I whispered. 23 years old in that photograph. A lowly lieutenant at the time, officially stationed at a remote military base that fundamentally no longer exists. Lydia's voice was completely flat, highly controlled. He has been physically seeing these impossible things for 35 years, Riley, and he has absolutely never uttered a single word. I instantly thought about my rigorous debriefing. The colonel's stern warning in the corridor. The absolute best thing you can physically do is aggressively forget about it. He hadn't been offering command advice. He had been speaking from deep, personal experience. Have you actively tried talking to him? I asked. I tried. I officially submitted a formal request for a closed-door meeting to discuss historical radar anomalies. He flatly denied it. And then, the very next morning, absolutely all of my archive access was completely, permanently revoked. They implicitly know you're digging. Of course they know. She offered a harsh, broken laugh. They have highly likely known since the exact millisecond I made the first digital copy. They are simply waiting to see exactly what I am going to do with it. So, what exactly are you going to do? She slowly looked up at me, and for the very first time, I saw raw, unadulterated fear burning deep in her eyes. Not the standard fear of a court-martial. Something vastly deeper. Something utterly primal. I am going to meticulously listen to the breathing again, she stated with iron resolve. Really listen. Not just the isolated 0.7-second clip. Absolutely all of them. Every single classified recording from every single isolated incident. I am going to aggressively layer them together. Mathematically synchronize the organic patterns. I am going to see if there is a hidden message. A message. Think about it deeply, Riley. The exact same signature, the exact same duration, the exact same biological sound, mathematically repeated over decades. If you desperately wanted to communicate with a primitive species that fundamentally didn't share your language, your advanced technology, or your cosmic frame of reference, exactly how would you do it? I violently shook my head. You are blindly assuming it actively wants to communicate. I am assuming absolutely nothing. She turned aggressively back to her glowing computer, pulling up a highly complex audio editing interface. But if there is actual meaning buried deep inside that breathing, I am going to fundamentally find it. Exactly 3 days later, Lydia Sharp abruptly stopped showing up for her assigned shifts. At first, I logically assumed she had simply been quietly reassigned, yanked off radar duty and banished somewhere incredibly remote, exactly the way the military seamlessly deals with personnel who ask vastly too many questions. But when I discreetly asked around the base, absolutely nobody knew a single thing. Her private quarters were entirely empty. Her secured computer terminal had been violently, professionally wiped completely clean. Every single classified file she had accumulated, every single handwritten note she had drafted, totally gone. Except for exactly one thing. The oblivious security officer who escorted me into her quarters to officially collect her personal effects completely failed to notice me smoothly palm a yellow legal pad off her barren desk. It had been meticulously hidden directly underneath a stack of blank printer paper, exactly as if she had inherently known someone specific would come looking for it. The vast majority of the pages were completely blank. But on the third page, scrawled in Lydia's neat, precise handwriting, was a singular, terrifying entry. A specific timestamp, 2 hours 31 minutes and 47 seconds. A specific frequency, 7.83 Hz. And 3 chilling words, aggressively underlined twice. It's not us. I stared intensely at those 3 words for an incredibly long time in the dark, desperately trying to understand. The timestamp flawlessly matched my close proximity encounter, the exact microsecond when the impossible shimmer had effortlessly passed beneath my aircraft. The specific frequency felt highly familiar too, though my brain couldn't immediately place it. It took me 3 solid days of quiet, relentless research to finally figure it out. 7.83 Hz is officially known as the Schumann resonance. It is the fundamental electromagnetic frequency of the Earth itself, actively generated by the massive space existing between the planet's physical surface and the ionosphere. It is frequently referred to as the Earth's biological heartbeat, a constant, planet-wide pulse that has undeniably existed for billions of years. The massive breathing that Lydia had successfully isolated from the radar gaps, it absolutely wasn't random background noise. It was flawlessly, mathematically synchronized to the Schumann resonance. Whatever impossible entity had smoothly passed beneath my aircraft, whatever towering anomalies had been manifesting in the skies over Nevada for decades, it was literally breathing in perfect rhythm with the Earth. And those 3 terrifying words, it's not us. I finally think I fully understand exactly what she meant now. After all these agonizing years, after all the suffocating silence, the buried secrets, and the impossible questions, I think I finally, truly understand. The impossible things dancing in the sky. They absolutely aren't extraterrestrial visitors. They absolutely aren't hostile invaders. They aren't even cosmic strangers. They have been right here all along, patiently breathing with the planet, silently waiting for us to finally notice them. I officially abandoned the United States Air Force exactly 6 months after Lydia entirely disappeared. On paper, it was a completely standard separation. End of service commitment, honorable discharge, all the proper bureaucratic boxes neatly checked. In terrifying reality, I fundamentally couldn't stay. Not after exactly what I had witnessed. Not after exactly what I now knew. The heavily classified files would remain permanently classified. The impossible radar recordings would remain deeply locked in subterranean vaults that officially didn't exist. And somewhere, buried deep in whatever dark, unaccountable corner of the shadow government dealt with anomalies like this, Lydia Sharp would merely become a redacted footnote. A nameless file. A bureaucratic problem that had been quietly, permanently resolved. I abruptly moved to Oregon. I purchased a small, isolated house resting directly on the coast, completely far away from the desert, far away from restricted military installations, incredibly far away from the empty, star-choked skies that had aggressively haunted my dreams. I desperately tried to forget. I couldn't. Every single crystal-clear night, I would inevitably find myself standing alone outside, intensely staring up at the sprawling stars, relentlessly looking for that impossible shimmer, desperately listening for that physics-breaking silence, waiting for the exact moment when the universe would violently hold its breath again. It absolutely never came. For 23 long, agonizing years, it never came. And then, last spring, I received a package. It arrived boasting absolutely no return address, 0 official postage marks, 0 indication of exactly where it had originated from. Just a heavily padded envelope with my name meticulously typed directly on the front. Inside was a standard USB drive and a single, folded piece of paper. The paper was incredibly old, yellowed with age, deeply creased, clearly handled many times over decades. Written on it, in neat handwriting I instantly, violently recognized, were 2 chilling lines. "They're not coming for us. We're being invited. Lydia." Somehow, impossibly, Lydia. I aggressively plugged the USB drive directly into my laptop with violently shaking hands. It contained a single encrypted audio file clearly labeled with the timestamp 023147_merged. The exact identical moment of my terrifying encounter. The exact fraction of a second when the entire world had gone dead silent. But this specific recording was fundamentally different. It absolutely wasn't a 0.7-second clip. It was over an entire hour long. I pressed play. The heavy, organic breathing initiated immediately. Slow, rhythmic, flawlessly synchronized, exactly as Lydia had brilliantly discovered, to the fundamental pulse of the planet. But now, meticulously layered beneath it, there were other sounds. Complex tones, frequencies, impossible patterns that organically rose and violently fell exactly like music, exactly like a complex language, exactly like something desperately trying to be completely understood. I sat paralyzed and listened for 3 solid hours. By the time it finally ended, I was openly crying. Not from raw fear, not from deep confusion, from something entirely else. A profound sense of cosmic recognition that I fundamentally couldn't rationally explain. A terrifying feeling that something buried deep inside my own biology was aggressively responding to those impossible sounds in ways my conscious mind fundamentally couldn't comprehend. And then, the file abruptly ended, and a voice spoke. Not the organic breathing, not the complex tones. A completely human voice. Crystal clear, terrifyingly calm, deeply familiar. Lydia's voice. "If you are physically hearing this, Riley, it explicitly means I succeeded. It means the encrypted copy I meticulously hid 23 years ago successfully found its way to you, exactly as I mathematically programmed it to. The automated systems I set up, the Deadman protocols, they worked. Even after absolutely all this time, I sat violently frozen, aggressively listening to the ghost. I inherently know you have questions. I fundamentally cannot answer the vast majority of them. But I can explicitly tell you this. I am absolutely not dead. I am absolutely not imprisoned. I am not being held against my will. I am somewhere else." The organic breathing, Riley, it absolutely wasn't just a sound. It was an invitation. A highly specific frequency flawlessly tuned to human biological perception, explicitly designed to resonate with something buried deep in our neural structure. A cosmic door patiently waiting to be opened. When I successfully synchronized absolutely all the recordings, when I meticulously layered them together and listened with the exact right filters, I heard it. Not just sound. Profound meaning. A message that wasn't constructed in words, but somehow, I flawlessly understood. I could hear her taking a deep, shuddering breath through the audio. They have been actively waiting for us. Not to aggressively invade. Not to clinically study. To warmly welcome. We are absolutely not alone in the universe, Riley. But it absolutely isn't what anyone logically thinks. The unearthly lights in the sky, the impossible shimmers on the radar, the terrifying moments of absolute silence, they absolutely aren't coming from out there. They are aggressively coming from in here. From the Earth. From the living planet itself. From something massive that has been deeply aware, and incredibly patient, and relentlessly watching since long before our primitive species existed. And now, they have officially decided we are finally ready. I honestly don't know exactly what for. I am relentlessly still learning. But I know this fundamental truth. Absolutely everything we arrogantly thought we knew about exactly who we are, and exactly where we came from. It is only a tiny fraction of the complete story. There is vastly more. So incredibly much more. If you truly want to find out, do exactly what I did. Listen to the recording. Really, truly listen. Not with your biological ears. With whatever specific part of you actively responds to the breathing, to the rhythm, to the pulse of the planet. And when the crushing silence finally comes, absolutely do not fight it. Step directly through. I will see you on the other side. The recording went completely dead. I sat paralyzed in the suffocating darkness of my living room, the laptop screen glowing softly, the USB drive still violently plugged into the port. Step directly through. I deeply thought about absolutely everything that had transpired. The terrifying flight over Nevada. The physics-breaking shimmer on the radar. The moment of impossible silence. 23 grueling years of constantly wondering, and endlessly waiting, and desperately trying to forget. And Lydia. Still out there somewhere. Wherever there actually was. Still biologically alive. Still relentlessly learning. Still reaching back across the void to share exactly what she had found. I slowly reached for the laptop and aggressively pressed play again. I have meticulously listened to that recording over 40 times now. Every single time, I hear something entirely new. Highly complex patterns buried within patterns. Bizarre frequencies that seem to dynamically shift entirely depending on my psychological state of mind. It is exactly as if the audio file itself is biologically alive, aggressively responding to my focused attention, revealing deep layers of cosmic meaning that simply weren't accessible prior. The heavy breathing is always there. Always constant. But firmly beneath it, the complex tones have begun to aggressively coalesce into something almost linguistic. Not standard words. Something vastly older. Something that effortlessly bypasses human language entirely, and actively speaks directly to parts of the brain that biologically evolved millions of years before humans invented words for absolutely anything at all. I have started keeping a meticulous journal of exactly what I hear, what I physically feel, what I think I finally understand. Day 12. The lower audio frequencies seem to directly correspond to raw emotion, pure fear, insatiable curiosity, deep longing. When I aggressively focus on them, incredibly vivid memories forcefully surface. Absolutely not my own memories, but something exactly like ancestral echoes. Massive forests I have entirely never seen. Alien skies I have absolutely never flown in. A profound sense of connection to the earth that runs significantly deeper than feet physically touching the ground. Day 23. I violently woke up completely standing in my backyard last night. Absolute zero memory of getting out of bed. The stars were impossibly, brilliantly bright. And for just a fleeting, terrifying moment, I genuinely thought I saw the impossible shimmer. That perfect patch of pure absence resting against the constellations. Patiently watching. Silently waiting. Day 31. I have entirely stopped sleeping at normal, biological hours. I consistently find myself the absolute most alert at precisely 2:31 a.m. The exact identical time of my terrifying encounter. It is exactly as if my internal biological clock has been violently reset to flawlessly match some other cosmic rhythm. The pitch-black night feels fundamentally different now. Significantly more alive. Vastly more aware. I constantly catch myself physically holding my breath at random intervals, desperately waiting for the profound silence to return. Day 38. The dreams have officially started. They absolutely aren't nightmares. Something else entirely. I am effortlessly flying, but absolutely not inside an aircraft. Just seamlessly floating through infinite darkness, entirely surrounded by brilliant lights that flawlessly pulse in exact time with my biological heartbeat. And in the vivid dreams, I am absolutely not alone. There are countless others with me. People I absolutely do not recognize, but somehow intimately, deeply know. We are all effortlessly moving toward the exact same cosmic destination, even though absolutely none of us can visually see exactly where it is. Day 47. I distinctly heard my name. Absolutely not recorded in the audio file. In the profound silence existing between the repetitions. Clear as a pristine bell. Lydia's voice. Riley, it's almost time. Day 52. I finally called my sister today. We fundamentally haven't spoken in years. I aggressively pushed absolutely everyone away after I abandoned the Air Force, vastly too consumed by exactly what I couldn't explain to maintain normal, human relationships. She cautiously asked if I was okay. I told her I was profoundly better than okay. I told her I was finally beginning to understand. She had absolutely no idea what I meant. Neither did I, really. But the words felt undeniably true. Day 58. I drove directly to the coast and sat completely paralyzed on the jagged rocks for hours, staring blindly at the violent waves. The rhythmic pulse of the ocean is fundamentally different from the heavy breathing on the recording, but they are undeniably somehow related. Exactly like wildly different dialects of the exact same cosmic language. The earth aggressively speaks in vastly many voices, I am finally realizing. Roaring water, howling wind, the agonizingly slow grind of tectonic plates, and something entirely else. Something massive that utilizes all of these exact elements as simple instruments in a grand cosmic symphony we have been utterly deaf to for millennia. Day 63. I completely stopped wearing my wristwatch. Linear time absolutely does not function the exact way I arrogantly thought it did. The dark hours spanning between midnight and dawn physically feel significantly longer now. Violently stretched exactly like taffy. Crammed full of endless moments that absolutely do not mathematically register on standard clocks. Sometimes I look up from the playing recording and abruptly realize that what psychologically felt like mere minutes was actually entire hours. Other times, whole days seem to violently compress into single heartbeats. I honestly don't know exactly what is biologically happening to me. I don't know if I am actively losing my fragile mind, or finally finding something that has been patiently waiting deep inside me all along. But I definitively know one thing for absolute certain. The profound silence is getting exponentially closer. It organically comes in tiny, fleeting moments now. Wedged between racing heartbeats. Between shallow breaths. That exact, impossible absence of sound that I first terrifiedly experienced at 25,000 feet screaming over the Nevada desert. It isn't frightening anymore. It is almost profoundly welcoming. Exactly like finally coming home to a house I fundamentally didn't know I had ever left. The very first time the silence actively lasted significantly more than a single second, I was sitting peacefully in my kitchen drinking coffee. The morning sunlight was streaming brightly through the window, completely ordinary and warm. And then, absolute nothingness. The aggressive hum of the refrigerator completely vanished. The loud birds outside went utterly dead quiet. Even my own biological breathing seemed to completely, entirely stop. For 3 agonizingly perfect seconds, I existed entirely in perfect, absolute stillness. And deep within that profound stillness, I physically felt something massive gently reach out and directly touch my mind. Incredibly gentle. Deeply curious. Exactly like a soft hand lightly brushing against my cheek in the pitch dark. Then, it was entirely gone. And the chaotic, physical world aggressively rushed back in. Deafening sounds and violent sensations rapidly flooding over me, exactly like a massive wave violently breaking on the shore. I involuntarily dropped my heavy coffee mug. I absolutely didn't even notice it violently shatter on the hardwood floor until the warm, dark liquid completely soaked through my socks. After that precise moment, the profound silences manifested significantly more frequently. A few isolated seconds here. A few terrifying seconds there. Each individual time, that exact same gentle touch. That exact same overwhelming sense of something unimaginably vast and infinitely patient, quietly waiting just on the other side of human perception. I aggressively started to look forward to them. Last night, I meticulously listened to the audio recording one final time, and when the very last complex tone completely faded, when the heavy breathing flawlessly settled back into its eternal, cosmic rhythm, I slowly closed my eyes and did exactly what Lydia instructed me to do. I completely stopped fighting it. The silence violently arrived, and for the very first time, I absolutely didn't pull back. I allowed it to completely take me. Exactly what I profoundly experienced next is impossibly difficult to accurately put into words. Not because it was cinematically dramatic or deeply terrifying. It absolutely wasn't. It was simply other. A state of absolute being that existed completely outside the biological categories my human mind had successfully developed to process physical reality. There was light. But absolutely not the standard light I knew from the physical world. This specific light possessed deep texture, raw intention. It wrapped entirely around me exactly like a living, biological entity, meticulously examining and profoundly accepting me in the exact identical instant. There were presences, not physical figures, not solid entities, just pure presences. Boundless awarenesses that had actively existed since long before there were biological eyes to see or physical ears to hear. They absolutely weren't alien. They were something entirely else. Something massive that had organically grown directly alongside biological life on this specific planet. Evolved directly with it. Become fundamentally, permanently inseparable from it. I desperately tried to intellectually count them, but human numbers completely failed to function in that dimensional space. It was exactly like logically asking how many abstract thoughts exist inside a dreaming mind. The question itself fundamentally didn't apply. There were vastly many. There was exactly one. There was something existing entirely in between that human language fundamentally possesses absolutely no word for. They had been present here since the very first single-celled organism blindly stirred in the primordial ocean. They had patiently watched the very first fish clumsily crawl onto dry land. They had observed the massive dinosaurs rise and violently fall. They had witnessed the very first primitive human stand fully upright and look up at the blazing stars with profound wonder. And directly through it all, they had been breathing. That incredibly slow, infinitely patient rhythm that Lydia had brilliantly isolated from the radar gaps. It absolutely wasn't the breathing of biological lungs. It was the fundamental breathing of consciousness itself. Effortlessly expanding. Flawlessly contracting. Meticulously maintaining the exact cosmic balance that made biological life possible. And Lydia was there. Not exactly as I had previously known her. Not the sharp-eyed analyst boasting a severe ponytail and careful hands, but as something vastly expanded, deeply extended, still undeniably human, but infinitely more. Exactly as if she had flawlessly unfurled into massive dimensions that I was only now barely beginning to perceive. She gracefully moved directly toward me, or I effortlessly moved directly toward her. Or the dimensional boundary permanently separating us simply ceased to exist entirely. In that specific place, physical distance was as utterly meaningless as linear time. You made it, she stated. Though absolutely zero acoustic words were spoken, the profound meaning arrived flawlessly, directly inside my mind, entirely bypassing the clumsy, primitive machinery of spoken language. What exactly is this place? It absolutely isn't a place. It is a perspective. A profound way of seeing that has always been completely available to us, if we only inherently knew how to look. I desperately tried to physically orient myself. to find some solid reference point in the endless, sprawling expanse of pure light and vast presence. But there was absolutely no up or down, zero left or right. Only here. Only now. Only this. The lights, the impossible shimmers on the radar. What exactly are they? Intersections. Exact moments when this massive perspective directly touches the physical, terrestrial world. They have been desperately reaching out for millennia, relentlessly trying to make a genuine contact. But we absolutely weren't ready to perceive them. Our biological senses weren't adequately developed enough. Our human minds were vastly too closed. And now, a select few of us are finally beginning to open. The heavy breathing frequency, it aggressively accelerates the biological process. It flawlessly attunes human consciousness directly to cosmic wavelengths we were absolutely never biologically designed to receive. It absolutely isn't invasive. It is vastly more like learning to finally see a brilliant color that was always, permanently there, just resting outside our visible spectrum. I deeply absorbed this, or at least, I desperately tried to. The cosmic information seemed to violently enter me on multiple dimensional levels simultaneously. Intellectual understanding flawlessly layered with deep emotional resonance, flawlessly layered with something infinitely deeper still. Something purely cellular. Something that made my very human DNA physically hum in profound recognition. How long exactly have you been here? I asked. Time fundamentally does not function the same way in this perspective. It feels exactly like fleeting moments. It feels exactly like centuries. Both are undeniably true. Neither is true. She paused heavily, and I distinctly sensed something exactly like a warm smile, though she possessed no physical face in the conventional sense. I have learned so incredibly much, Riley. Things that would comfortably take entire lifetimes to adequately explain in primitive human terms. But there is still so much more to profoundly understand. Why me? Why you? Why exactly now? Because we organically encountered the silence. The overwhelming majority of people blindly live their entire terrestrial lives entirely without experiencing that profound moment of pure, cosmic absence. But when you flew your aircraft directly through that shimmer, when you physically passed completely through the intersection, you were heavily exposed. You were marked. And directly after that, returning here was simply a matter of linear time. The other pilots, the other encounters meticulously documented over the decades. Did they? Some successfully found their way here. Others fundamentally couldn't let go of the raw terror. They violently blocked the invitation, hermetically sealed themselves off, and blindly lived out normal, mundane lives without ever truly knowing exactly what they had missed. There is absolutely no cosmic judgment in that. The door only formally opens for those who explicitly choose to walk through. I instantly thought about Colonel Harrison. 35 agonizing years of inherently knowing, of having been heavily exposed, of being offered a cosmic invitation that he had fundamentally never accepted. Was he paralyzed by fear, or had he simply, logically decided that the mundane life he knew was perfectly enough? He was deeply afraid, Lydia stated, effortlessly reading my raw thoughts exactly as easily as I might read words printed on a page. Not afraid of what he might uncover here, but terrified of exactly what he might be forced to give up to reach it. His decorated career, his established identity, his rigid sense of being a completely separate, autonomous self. For the vast majority of people, that is vastly too high a price. Is it a price? Giving those specific things up? Only if you arrogantly perceive them as catastrophic losses. From this expanded perspective, they look significantly more like artificial limitations. Heavy walls we arrogantly built entirely around ourselves because we were fundamentally too young to know there was absolutely anything resting beyond them. I considered this deeply. My military career was already long behind me. My fixed identity had been aggressively fragmenting since that specific night in 2002, and my rigid sense of being physically separate, that had begun to violently dissolve the exact microsecond I heard the heavy breathing on that encrypted recording. Maybe the cosmic price had already been completely paid. What exactly happens now? I asked. That is entirely up to you. You can permanently stay here, learn, grow, seamlessly become exactly what I have become. A biological bridge between vastly different perspectives. A flawless translator for a primitive species that is finally, slowly becoming ready to truly understand its exact place in the larger, cosmic consciousness. Or, you can choose to go back. Meticulously write down exactly what you have experienced. Openly share it with the select few who are fully ready to listen. The ultimate choice is yours, Riley. It always has been. I deeply considered the options. The vast, endlessly expanding awareness of this cosmic place, whatever it fundamentally was. The profound chance to permanently leave behind absolutely everything I had ever known and seamlessly become part of something unimaginably larger. And then, I thought heavily about the fractured world I had come from. The deeply confused, relentlessly searching, desperately lonely world where fragile people endlessly looked up at the stars and constantly wondered if they were entirely alone. They absolutely weren't. They fundamentally had never been. And someone urgently needed to tell them the truth. I want to go back, I stated. For now. Lydia fully understood. Of course she did. Complete understanding was the very foundational substance of this place. The cosmic door remains permanently open, she stated. Whenever you are fully ready to return, you will inherently know exactly how. The breathing will flawlessly guide you. It always does. Will I ever see you again? You are physically seeing me right now, Riley. You will absolutely always be seeing me now. That is exactly what this cosmic perspective profoundly teaches you. Biological separation is an absolute illusion. We are all deeply connected. We absolutely always have been. The only question is whether we bravely choose to acknowledge it. She seamlessly moved closer. Or I seamlessly moved closer. Or the dimensional boundary completely separating us violently dissolved entirely for one perfect, cosmic moment. Thank you, I projected. For successfully sending the recording. For absolutely not giving up on me. Thank you for truly listening, she replied. Most people hear the massive breathing and instantly turn away in terror. You heard it, and you actively leaned in. That is incredibly rare. That is profoundly precious. That is exactly what they have been patiently waiting for. And then, the impossible light began to slowly fade. The vast presences began to smoothly recede. And I physically felt myself violently falling directly back through massive layers of cosmic awareness, plunging straight toward the dense, highly limited, deeply beautiful physical world I had left behind. I came back. I am actively writing this testimony right now because Lydia was absolutely right. The door only formally opens for those who explicitly choose to walk through. But right before you can walk through a door, you urgently need to know it physically exists. This testimony is that fundamental knowledge. The impossible lights you sometimes see violently dancing in the sky. The ones that maneuver entirely wrong and vanish vastly too quickly. They absolutely are not extraterrestrial spacecraft. They are not hostile visitors from distant stars. They are intersections. Highly localized places where an entirely different kind of cosmic awareness physically touches our terrestrial reality. Aggressively reaching out. Offering a profound invitation that the vast majority of us are simply vastly too distracted or deeply too afraid to properly receive. The highly classified radar recordings. The heavily redacted files locked away in subterranean vaults. The decades of localized sightings and impossible encounters that have been systematically, aggressively hidden from the public view. They are absolutely not definitive evidence of alien contact. They are irrefutable evidence of something infinitely older and profoundly closer to home. Something that has been patiently breathing with the living planet since long before we ever existed. Something that is silently waiting for us to join it. I honestly don't know exactly what happens next. I don't know if this specific account will successfully reach anyone who is mentally ready to understand it, or if it will simply become just another completely forgotten story buried in the endless noise of the internet. But I know this absolute truth. There is a highly specific frequency, 7.83 Hz, the Schumann resonance, the fundamental heartbeat of the Earth. If you completely quiet your rushing mind and actively listen, really, truly listen, you can physically hear it. And if you listen to it long enough, if you allow it to flawlessly synchronize with your own biological breathing, your own heartbeat, your own human consciousness, you might finally start to hear the cosmic invitation too. The profound silence is patiently waiting. The door is permanently open. And on the other side, Lydia Sharp is absolutely still taking meticulous notes, still aggressively learning, still expanding directly into massive dimensions that we are only barely beginning to biologically imagine. She is absolutely not alone there. Absolutely none of us are. Not really. But she has seamlessly become something exactly like a cosmic guide, a brilliant beacon for others who successfully find their way through the void. I firmly think, when the time is completely right, I will go back and permanently join her. But for right now, I have critical work to do. Because the absolute very first step to successfully walking through a door is knowing it undeniably exists. And now, you officially know. 3 words. Aggressively underlined twice. It's not us. Not aggressive aliens. Not extraterrestrial visitors. Not cosmic strangers. Something entirely else. Something incredibly massive that has been actively here all along. Patiently breathing. Endlessly waiting. Relentlessly watching the sky with cosmic eyes we have absolutely never seen. Until we finally learn to look back. I have absolutely never told this story publicly before. Not because I was officially ordered by command to stay quiet, though I undeniably was. Not because I signed suffocating, classified non-disclosure agreements, though I absolutely signed plenty. I rigidly stayed silent because, for the longest time, I genuinely believed that if I openly spoke about exactly what transpired that night near Silver Peak, Nevada, I would sound exactly like every other unhinged conspiracy theorist aggressively rambling about lights in the sky and shadow government cover-ups. But I am 53 years old now. I have carried this crushing weight for over 2 decades. And last month, I casually watched a mainstream news segment broadcasting declassified military footage showcasing unidentified aerial phenomena, and something buried deep inside me simply violently cracked open. My name is Jared Cololton. In 2003, I was a staff sergeant serving in the United States Army, explicitly assigned to a logistics support unit, actively operating out of a remote base I absolutely will not name. Not because naming the installation would secure me in federal trouble at this point, but because exactly what happened to me and my partner that night fundamentally had absolutely nothing to do with the base itself. It violently occurred on a desolate stretch of dirt road that the vast majority of humanity has never heard of. Inside a massive tunnel that absolutely does not exist on any civilian map I have ever found. The man who was physically deployed with me that night was Specialist Devin Maddox. We had actively worked together for roughly 8 months by that point. Devin was the specific kind of highly reliable soldier who kept his head down, meticulously did his job, and strictly didn't ask questions he inherently knew he didn't need answers to. That was exactly why I had specifically requested him for classified night transport runs. The less talking, the vastly better. The fewer questions regarding sealed cargo manifests we couldn't read, and phantom destinations that officially didn't exist, the smoother everything operated. But Devin desperately asked questions that night. And so did I. The encrypted call abruptly came through at exactly 18:47 hours on a mundane Thursday evening in late October. I vividly remember the exact precise time because I had been aggressively watching the clock, silently counting down the dragging minutes until my shift officially ended. We were scheduled to be off duty by 1900 hours. I had highly anticipated plans. Nothing special, just a cold 6-pack and a football game playing on the tiny television in my quarters. but the secured phone violently rang, and I inherently knew before I even picked the receiver up that my evening was about to fundamentally change. "Colton," I answered sharply. "Sergeant, we urgently need you for a priority transport." The authoritative voice belonged to Captain Morrison. A hardened man I had officially spoken to maybe 3 distinct times during my entire posting. He absolutely wasn't my direct superior. He operated entirely within a shadow division that exclusively dealt with what we vaguely called sensitive materials, which was simply military speak for anomalous things that regular, enlisted soldiers absolutely weren't supposed to know about. "Sir, I am officially scheduled off in exactly 13 minutes. I am fully aware. This heavily supersedes your mundane schedule. Report directly to Hangar 7 with a secondary driver. You are running a tandem vehicle escort to classified coordinates that will be explicitly provided en route. Official departure in 45 minutes. What exactly is the payload, sir?" There was a heavy pause on the line. Not a terribly long one, but vastly long enough to communicate danger. "Equipment retrieval," he stated coldly. "That is absolutely all you need to know." The secure line went completely dead. I sat paralyzed for a moment, staring blankly at the receiver. Equipment retrieval. That highly specific phrase had been utilized exactly twice during my entire tenure at the base. Both times, it explicitly meant we were actively extracting something unexplainable from a geographic location that officially didn't exist, aggressively transporting it to a subterranean facility that wasn't on any terrestrial map, and permanently never speaking about either. I located Devon out in the motor pool, meticulously finishing up the paperwork on a mundane supply run he'd completed earlier that afternoon. He looked up when I approached, and something dark in my expression must have instantaneously told him absolutely everything he needed to know. "Night run?" he asked quietly. "Priority transport. Departure in 45 minutes. He didn't sigh. He absolutely didn't complain. He just offered a tight nod, set down his pen, and silently followed me to Hangar 7. The heavy vehicles waiting for us were standard military Humvees, but they had been aggressively modified. The thick windows were tinted vastly darker than standard military regulation allowed, and there was highly complex, additional equipment mounted directly onto the reinforced roofs. Advanced satellite dishes, I foolishly thought at first, though they absolutely didn't look quite right. The geometric shapes were fundamentally wrong. Vastly too sharp. Too angular. A nameless technician I entirely didn't recognize handed me a heavily sealed envelope and a secure, handheld GPS unit. "Do absolutely not open the sealed envelope until you are physically positioned on Route 6, he explicitly ordered. "The GPS will flawlessly guide you to the first initial waypoint. After that, rigidly follow the written instructions inside the envelope." "What exactly about radio contact?" I asked. He sternly shook his head. "Absolute radio silence for the entire duration. If there is a catastrophic emergency, utilize the secondary encrypted frequency listed in your materials. Otherwise, absolutely zero communication." I had executed enough of these black budget runs to implicitly know vastly better than to argue. I took the sealed envelope, grabbed the GPS, and climbed heavily into the lead vehicle. Devon quietly took the second Humvee. We aggressively pulled out of the cavernous hangar at exactly 1945 hours. The sprawling desert sky was already rapidly darkening to that deep, bruised purple that arrives right before full nightfall in the Badlands. The glowing GPS flawlessly led us north on Route 95, then banked us west onto a complex series of increasingly isolated, decaying roads. The surrounding terrain violently shifted from flat, predictable desert scrubland into jagged, rocky hills, and finally into the specific kind of empty, moon-like, alien landscape that makes you genuinely feel like you've driven straight off the absolute edge of human civilization. I violently tore open the envelope at Route 6, exactly as instructed. Inside was a single, crisp sheet of paper featuring a complex set of geographic coordinates, and one singular, chilling sentence. "Proceed directly to Silver Peak Tunnel. Await further instructions at exactly 22:30 hours." I had vaguely heard of Silver Peak. It was an incredibly small, mostly abandoned historic mining town situated roughly 100 miles from where we had initially started. But I had absolutely never heard of a massive tunnel located near it. The scattered roads I intimately knew in that specific grid were all strictly surface routes. 0 tunnels. 0 mountain underpasses. Absolutely nothing that would require aggressively boring straight through the solid mountains. I keyed my handheld radio, the absolute only communication device we had been authorized, and clicked the mic exactly twice. Devon instantly clicked back once. Our pre-established signal confirming that absolutely everything was proceeding normally. We relentlessly drove for another entire hour. The desolate landscape grew terrifyingly stranger as we rapidly approached the coordinates. The rocky hills became aggressively steeper, noticeably more jagged. The paved road violently narrowed from 2 lanes down to 1, and then degraded into something that absolutely wasn't quite a road at all. It was significantly more like a pulverized dirt path that had been hastily, brutally graded just enough to allow heavy vehicle passage. And then, I physically saw it. The massive tunnel entrance aggressively emerged from the suffocating darkness exactly like a violent, gaping wound carved directly into the solid mountainside. It was vastly larger than I logically expected, easily wide enough for 2 heavy military vehicles to comfortably pass side by side. But there were absolutely 0 lights. 0 terrestrial signs. 0 indication that it was absolutely anything other than a massive, terrifying hole bored into the living rock. I slowed the Humvee to a complete halt roughly 50 yards from the gaping entrance and entirely killed my headlights. Directly behind me, Devon flawlessly executed the exact same maneuver. For a terrifying moment, we just sat paralyzed there in the complete, suffocating darkness. The absolute only sound was the organic, cooling tick of my massive engine block, and the faint whisper of the desert wind violently cutting against the vehicle's heavy frame. Then, I physically heard it. It absolutely wasn't an acoustic sound, exactly. It was significantly more like the violent absence of sound. A sudden, profound, physics-breaking silence that seemed to aggressively press against my eardrums exactly like deep, heavy water. The howling wind completely stopped. The hot engine entirely stopped ticking. Even my own biological heartbeat seemed to fade into something incredibly distant and heavily muffled. I frantically reached down for my handheld radio. It was completely dead. Not simply powered off. Dead. The glowing green power indicator was entirely dark. I aggressively tried the Humvee's internal vehicle radio next. Absolutely nothing. Not even a faint whisper of static. I cautiously stepped out of the Humvee. The ambient air was brutally cold. Vastly, unexplainably colder than it mathematically should have been for late October in the Nevada desert. My rapid breath came out in thick, highly visible puffs of freezing fog. That was fundamentally wrong. The temperature had easily been sitting in the mid-60s when we originally departed the base. This specific atmosphere physically felt like it was resting significantly below freezing. Devon's heavy door clicked open. I distinctly heard his combat boots hit the gravel, and then he was standing directly beside me, his pale face barely visible in the oppressive darkness. "My radio is completely dead," he stated. It absolutely wasn't a question. "Mine too," I replied grimly. "And the vehicle's entire electrical systems." What the hell exactly is this place? I fundamentally didn't possess an answer. We just stood there. 2 highly trained soldiers entirely abandoned in the absolute middle of nowhere, helplessly staring into a massive tunnel that officially shouldn't exist, completely surrounded by a physics-breaking silence that felt terrifyingly, undeniably alive. And then, the impossible lights appeared. I desperately need you to truly understand something critical here. I have been aggressively asked about this highly specific moment more times than I can possibly count. By federal investigators, by military doctors, by the extremely few close friends I have trusted enough to confide in. And every single time, I violently struggle to accurately describe exactly what I witnessed in a manner that logically makes sense. The lights absolutely didn't beam down from above us, exactly like you would expect from advanced aircraft. They didn't project out from the depths of the tunnel, or from the jagged hills surrounding us. They aggressively came from absolutely everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. A soft, blindingly intense blue-white glow that seemed to literally seep directly into physical existence, exactly like thick fog. Except standard fog absolutely doesn't glow. And fog fundamentally doesn't pulse. The impossible pulse was incredibly slow. Rhythmic. Exactly like a massive, cosmic heartbeat. I physically felt it long before I consciously, visually registered it. A deep, heavy vibration resting directly inside my chest that flawlessly matched the rhythm of the unearthly light. It absolutely wasn't physically painful. It wasn't even strictly uncomfortable. But it was undeniably, overwhelmingly there. And it was undeniably absolutely not emanating from anything mechanical. Jared. Devon's terrified voice was barely a trembling whisper. He was pointing a shaking finger directly at the tunnel entrance. I looked. The unnatural glow was exponentially brighter there. Aggressively concentrated around the gaping mouth of the tunnel. Exactly as if something massive was lurking just inside. Something that was actively generating the impossible light. Something that was patiently waiting. "We urgently need to leave," Devon stated. "We need to get back inside the vehicles and get the hell out of here." He was absolutely right. Every single biological, survival instinct I possessed was violently screaming at me to flee. But my heavy combat boots fundamentally wouldn't move. It absolutely wasn't standard medical paralysis. Not exactly. It was vastly more like my physical body had unilaterally decided, completely independent of my conscious, logical mind, that cowardly leaving was fundamentally not a viable option. "I can't," I stated. "What exactly do you mean you can't?" "I mean, I physically cannot make my biological body get back inside that vehicle." Devon aggressively tried to move. I helplessly watched him violently strain against something completely invisible. His muscles visibly tensing, his jaw aggressively clenching. After an agonizing moment, he completely stopped, panting heavily. "What is this?" His voice violently cracked on the final word. I didn't offer an answer. I was staring entirely transfixed at the tunnel, because something impossible was smoothly coming out of it. I have witnessed an incredible amount of horrific things in my military career. I have been actively deployed in brutal combat zones. I have survived catastrophic accidents that would easily turn the vast majority of civilian stomachs. I have physically held dying men and helplessly watched the light permanently leave their eyes. Absolutely none of that prepared my sanity for exactly what seamlessly emerged from the Silver Peak Tunnel on that freezing October night. It absolutely wasn't a standard vehicle, though at first, my desperate brain aggressively tried to categorize it as one. It was vastly too smooth. Too impossibly seamless. A massive shape that seemed to effortlessly flow rather than mechanically roll. Gliding silently over the rough gravel without absolutely any visible means of terrestrial propulsion. The exterior surface was heavily metallic, but absolutely not any terrestrial metal I recognized. It aggressively caught the pulsing blue-white glow and violently reflected it back in complex ways that physically hurt the human eye to look at directly. Exactly like desperately trying to focus on a mirror reflecting blinding sunlight. The impossible shape was roughly an elongated oval, maybe 30 feet long and 10 feet tall. There were 0 visible seams, 0 windows, 0 markings, insignias, or thrusters of any conceivable kind. It was exactly as if someone had taken a single massive piece of exotic material and somehow flawlessly formed it into this impossible object without cutting, welding, or physically joining absolutely anything together. It smoothly glided to a halt roughly 20 feet from where Devon and I stood, helplessly frozen. The ambient air actively surrounding the craft shimmered violently. Not from thermal heat. The ambient temperature was still resting well below what it mathematically should have been, but from something entirely else. A terrifying distortion. A violent, localized warping of space itself that instantly made my eyes intensely water and my stomach violently churn. Actively looking at the object was exactly like staring at a complex optical illusion. Something your human brain inherently knows is fundamentally wrong, but absolutely cannot quite figure out how to visually correct. For a terrifying, profoundly long moment, absolutely nothing happened. The unearthly glow pulsed. The massive shape hovered effortlessly. And we helplessly waited. Two heavily trained soldiers completely stripped of absolutely every weapon that truly mattered. Not firearms, but biological movement. Open communication. The fundamental ability to flee. I could clearly hear Devon hyperventilating directly beside me. Shallow, incredibly rapid breaths that perfectly matched my own. We were both absolutely terrified. We were both desperately trying not to physically show it. And we were both profoundly failing. Then, the very atmosphere changed. I honestly don't know exactly how else to physically describe it. The freezing temperature shifted again, unexplainably warming slightly. And there was abruptly a massive pressure expanding inside my head. Not physically painful, but overwhelmingly present. Exactly like the initiation of a severe sinus headache, or the profound physiological feeling you endure when you descend vastly too quickly inside a pressurized airplane. And riding the wave of that heavy pressure came the images. They absolutely weren't hallucinations. They weren't dreams. These were crystal clear, razor-sharp pictures that violently appeared directly inside my mind with the absolute, undeniable force of genuine memory. Except they absolutely weren't my memories. I vividly saw the Silver Peak tunnel from high above. Not as it currently existed now, but as it had physically been decades ago during initial construction. I saw men clad in vintage military uniforms I absolutely didn't recognize. Heavy equipment that looked simultaneously primitive and impossibly, terrifyingly advanced. I saw the massive object currently hovering in front of me, or something exactly identical to it, being carefully lowered deep into the subterranean tunnel, being heavily hidden, being permanently sealed entirely away from the outside world. I saw dates, complex numbers, geographic coordinates, massive volumes of raw information violently flooding directly into my consciousness vastly faster than I could intellectually process. I vividly saw advanced maps, intricate diagrams, complex schematics of massive things I absolutely couldn't identify, sprawling structures that explicitly existed deep underground, beneath the crushing pressure of the ocean, operating in remote places that absolutely no human being had ever successfully explored. I vividly saw complex networks seamlessly connecting these structures, hidden pathways that effortlessly spanned entire continents, vast, automated systems that had been flawlessly operating for vastly longer than human civilization had even existed. I saw faces, absolutely not human faces, something entirely else. Biological features that were terrifyingly almost familiar, but fundamentally, biologically wrong. Eyes that proudly held an ancient intelligence so profoundly alien that merely looking at them felt exactly like staring directly into a cosmic abyss that was actively looking back. And then, I saw Devon. Not the terrified Devon physically standing paralyzed directly beside me, but a vastly different version. Significantly older. Grayer, standing alone inside a classified room I had absolutely never seen, frantically speaking to isolated people whose faces I couldn't quite make out. He was desperately explaining something, aggressively pointing at classified documents, and he looked utterly, profoundly terrified. I desperately tried to intellectually make sense of what I was witnessing. Frantically tried to snap the jagged pieces together into something logically coherent. But the vivid images were violently coming far too fast, aggressively overlapping, deeply contradicting each other. It was exactly like trying to drink directly from a blasted fire hose, completely overwhelming, entirely chaotic, fundamentally impossible to control. And then, exactly as suddenly as they had violently initiated, the images completely stopped. I aggressively gasped, violently sucking in freezing air exactly as if I had been drowning underwater. Directly beside me, Devon was violently doing the exact same thing. His shaking hands braced on his knees, his breath ripping out in ragged, desperate bursts. "Did you?" he started, his voice shattered. "Yes." "What in the hell was?" "I don't know." The impossible object began to smoothly move again. It absolutely didn't advance toward us. It moved sideways, effortlessly circling directly around our position to exactly where our heavy military vehicles sat dark and silent on the dirt road. It smoothly paused directly beside my Humvee for a terrifying moment that psychologically stretched into eternity. I helplessly watched it hover there motionless, and I experienced the strangest, overwhelming feeling that it was actively examining the heavy vehicle, clinically studying it, meticulously learning something highly specific about us purely from the primitive machine we had arrived in. The blue-white light violently intensified for a fleeting moment, so blindingly bright that I had to completely squeeze my eyes shut. When I slowly opened them again, the massive object had effortlessly moved to Devon's Humvee. The exact same pause, the exact same thorough examination, the exact same terrifying feeling of being deeply observed, meticulously catalogued, and securely filed away for future cosmic reference. And then, it effortlessly rose straight up. Absolutely zero change in physical angle. Zero visible propulsion or acceleration. It simply went from occupying space directly in front of us to hovering vastly above us. And then it transformed into a mere point of light among the blinding stars. And then, it was absolutely nothing at all. The unearthly glow completely faded. The heavy, invasive pressure inside my skull vanished instantly. And suddenly, impossibly, I could physically move again. I honestly do not remember the subsequent few minutes clearly. I intimately know that Devon and I both violently ran back to our heavy vehicles. I know that we frantically tried the tactical radios, still completely dead. I know we cranked the heavy engines, still entirely dead. I know that we stood there in the suffocating darkness, panting heavily, desperately trying to psychologically process exactly what had just transpired. And then Devon said something that instantly turned my blood to solid ice. "Jared, look directly at your vehicle." I walked aggressively around to the front grille of my Humvee, directly to where Devon was pointing his tactical flashlight. The heavy military license plate was completely gone. Not physically unbolted or removed. Gone. The heavy metal frame that officially held it was absolutely still there. But exactly where the stamped plate should have rested, there was exclusively smooth, completely unmarked steel. Exactly as if the heavy plate had fundamentally never existed. Exactly as if the massive vehicle had been manufactured entirely without one. "That is physically impossible," I stated. "Check the VIN." I rapidly moved to the driver's side and aggressively looked at the small, riveted plate mounted directly on the dashboard where the vehicle identification number is permanently stamped. Every single military vehicle in existence officially possesses one. It is exactly how the government meticulously tracks them, formally identifies them, and bureaucratically proves that they physically exist within the system. The metal plate was undeniably there, but the VIN was completely gone. Not violently scratched off. Not casually covered up. The raw metal was utterly, perfectly smooth. Completely unmarked. Exactly as if absolutely zero numbers had ever been mechanically stamped into the steel. I slowly ran my trembling fingers directly across the smooth surface. The raw metal was incredibly warm. Vastly warmer than it mathematically should have been given the freezing ambient air. And exactly as my fingertips traced the spot where the serial number should have been embedded, I physically felt something. A vibration. Incredibly faint. Almost entirely imperceptible. But definitively, undeniably there. Exactly as if the physical metal itself was actively humming at an unearthly frequency resting just below human hearing. I violently pulled my hand back. "Check yours," I ordered Devon. He desperately didn't want to. I could vividly see it painted on his pale face. The intense reluctance, the raw fear, the desperate, pathetic hope that maybe his assigned vehicle had somehow been spared whatever impossibility had aggressively altered mine. He reluctantly checked anyway. The exact same terrifying result. License plate entirely gone. The VIN flawlessly erased. The raw metal incredibly warm and faintly humming. "What exactly do we do?" he asked quietly. I frantically checked my wristwatch. It had completely stopped at exactly 22:47. Just 17 minutes after we were officially supposed to receive our further instructions. Instructions that had absolutely never manifested. "We wait," I stated grimly. "We wait for someone to eventually come find us." It was the absolutely wrong decision. I deeply know that now. We absolutely should have walked. Completely abandoned the compromised vehicles, hiked miles back to the main highway, and frantically flagged down civilian help. But something terrifying kept us anchored there. Call it clinical shock. Call it rigid military training. Or call it the heavy, lingering effect of whatever had violently gotten into our fragile heads. We sat paralyzed inside my Humvee in the freezing dark, and we helplessly waited. I honestly don't know exactly when my exhausted body surrendered and fell asleep. One agonizing moment, I was sitting paralyzed in the driver's seat, intensely staring at the gaping tunnel entrance, relentlessly replaying everything that had transpired in my mind. The very next moment, I was violently opening my eyes to blinding daylight. Deeply disoriented and profoundly confused, possessing absolutely zero memory of the lost hours in between. My analog watch still glared 22:47. But the desert sun was high up. The sprawling sky was brilliant blue, and parked flawlessly beside us, in the exact spot where there had been absolutely nothing the night prior, were two massive, pitch-black SUVs. They possessed absolutely no government markings, and the windows were tinted so heavily dark they might as well have been spray-painted. I frantically reached for Devon, but his passenger seat was completely empty. Raw panic hit my chest exactly like a physical force. I violently threw open my door and stumbled out, aggressively blinking against the blinding sunlight, desperately searching for absolutely any sign of my partner. He was standing passively by the black SUVs, quietly talking to two men clad entirely in crisp civilian clothes. They were both wearing dark sunglasses. They both undeniably possessed the rigid, disciplined posture of men who had spent considerable time in elite military units. And they both turned to look directly at me with stone-cold expressions that revealed absolutely nothing. "Sergeant Colton," one of them stated flatly. It absolutely wasn't a greeting. "Where is? What exactly happened? Who in the hell are you? Your partner is perfectly fine. You are both completely fine. We are officially here to escort you back to base. What about the heavy vehicles? They will be meticulously handled. What about the tunnel? There absolutely is no tunnel, Sergeant." I violently turned to look directly at the mountainside where we had stood terrified the night before, where the impossible object had effortlessly emerged, where the impossible had become reality. The massive tunnel entrance was completely gone, not collapsed, not hastily hidden. The massive rock face was entirely smooth and perfectly unbroken, exactly as if absolutely nothing had ever been there. Exactly as if the massive Silver Peak tunnel had never fundamentally existed at all. I felt something fundamentally give way inside me. Not my sanity. I was barely holding onto that. But my absolute certainty of what was real. The fundamental belief that reality followed strict rules, that massive tunnels couldn't simply appear and vanish without a trace, crumbled in that exact moment, and it never fully rebuilt itself. I walked over to where Devon was standing. In the harsh morning light, he looked significantly older, with deep, dark shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there the night before. When he turned to face me, I saw something in his expression I couldn't quite identify. Raw fear, maybe. Or recognition. Like he was realizing something terrifying that he desperately didn't want to know. "You okay?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just stared at me for a long moment, then turned silently back to the men in civilian clothes. "We should get moving," one of them stated. "Long drive back." They explicitly separated us for the trip. I rode in the lead SUV with the taller of the two men. He drove in complete silence for the first hour, effortlessly navigating the winding desert roads. Finally, I couldn't take the suffocating quiet anymore. "What exactly was that thing?" I demanded. "The object. The lights. What did we see?" He didn't even look at me. Kept his eyes locked on the road, hands steady on the wheel. "You saw what you saw," he replied flatly. "That's absolutely not an answer. It's the absolute only answer you're going to get, Sergeant. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for everyone." "Easier for who?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost apologetic. "I've been doing this cleanup for 15 years. I've seen a lot of people come through situations like yours. Some handle it well. They go back to their lives, they don't ask questions, and they learn to live with the uncertainty. Others, they can't let it go. They dig. They investigate. They try to find answers in places they aren't supposed to go." "And what exactly happens to those people?" He finally looked at me, just for a single second. But in that second, I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run entirely cold. "They find what they're looking for," he said. "And by then, it's vastly too late." I didn't ask a single question after that. The drive back to base took 4 agonizing hours. When we arrived, Devon and I were taken to separate clinical rooms with blinding white walls and fluorescent lighting. Doctors conducted thorough, entirely silent medical examinations. Checking vitals, drawing blood, shining harsh lights into our eyes. No one told us what they were looking for, and no one told us what they found. Afterward, we were handed fresh uniforms and told to wait. I sat alone for 6 hours. When the door finally opened, it wasn't the men in suits. It was Captain Morrison, the exact same officer who had assigned the mission the night before. "Sergeant Colton," he said, taking a seat directly across from me. "How are you feeling?" "Confused, sir. Concerned. I would deeply like to know exactly what happened." "What exactly do you remember?" So, I told him all of it. The tunnel, the lights, the seamless object, the alien images forced into my head, the missing license plates and erased Vince. I told him about the freezing cold and the physics-breaking silence. He listened intently, entirely without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "I appreciate your thoroughness," he said. "But I need you to completely understand something. What you are describing didn't happen. Sir, there is absolutely no tunnel near Silver Peak. There never has been. You and Specialist Maddox were assigned a routine transport run that was officially cancelled due to severe mechanical failure. You spent the entire night at a roadside rest stop waiting for maintenance support. Your vehicles are currently being repaired. End of story." I stared at him in disbelief. That's absolutely not what happened. That is exactly what the official records will show. That is what you will report if anyone ever asks. And that is what you will remember, in time. What exactly does that mean? He stood up. "It means that some things are infinitely better forgotten, Sergeant. For everyone's sake." I was officially released an hour later. Devon and I were never debriefed together. We were never allowed to formally speak about that night again. The unspoken threat was crystal clear. Discuss it, and your military career is over. Discuss it, and vastly worse things might follow. But I had to fundamentally know. I had to understand. So, I completely broke the rules. It took me 3 weeks to find a secure way to talk to Devon alone. We had both been rapidly, quietly reassigned. Him to a supply depot in Nevada, me to a training facility in Arizona. One day we were stationed together, the next we were separated by hundreds of miles and massive bureaucracy. Every official request I submitted to contact him was instantly denied. No explanation given. I asked around through unofficial channels, and people looked at me like I was asking about a ghost. Finally, a supply clerk who owed me a favor gave me a tip. Devon worked day shifts, and he frequented a local dive bar called the Dusty Road on Saturday nights. I put in for leave, drove 6 grueling hours through the desert, and sat in the parking lot of that bar for 45 minutes, terrified to go inside. What if talking to him made things worse? What if whatever anomaly was happening to us was contagious, and being in the exact same room would accelerate it? The desperate need to know was stronger than the fear. I found him sitting in a dim back booth, nursing a beer. He looked completely exhausted. His face was thinner, lined with a stress that had absolutely nothing to do with physical labor. "I knew you'd come," he said quietly when I sat down. "I desperately need to know what you remember." "The exact same as you, probably. The tunnel, the lights, the thing." He took a long, heavy drink. "And the gaps. Gaps. Times I fundamentally can't account for. Not just that night. Since then. I'll be doing something routine, and then suddenly an entire hour has passed and I have absolutely no idea where it went. Last week, I woke up standing in the motor pool at 3 a.m. staring at a vehicle, with zero memory of how I got there. A chill ran straight down my spine. I've had the exact same thing. Moments, minutes that just vanish. And the dreams, too." Devon stared at the condensation on his glass. "I see them. Not the object. The figures. I can never quite focus on them, but they're there, watching me. Showing me things. Complex plans and diagrams I don't understand but can't forget." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with existential terror. "I think they put something in my head, Jared. Not just images. Something permanent. Something that's still growing, actively changing me." "Devon, I tried to file an official report." He let out a broken, humorless laugh. 3 days after we got back, I typed up absolutely everything and submitted it through official channels. I wanted physical proof that it was real. You know what happened? Nothing. The report simply didn't exist. I searched the system, and it wasn't there. Not rejected. Just entirely gone. Like I'd never written it. Someone had meticulously erased everything. Our assignment orders, the transport requests, our medical logs. According to every database, we were never anywhere near Silver Peak. "I'm starting to seriously wonder if I'm losing my mind, Jared," Devon whispered. "If we both imagined it. What if that thing didn't just show us images? What if it actively rewrote our memories?" I reached across the table and firmly grabbed his wrist. His skin was unnaturally, uncomfortably cold. "Look at me," I said. "Whatever happened that night was absolutely real. We both saw it. We both felt it. And we're both still here, still ourselves." He didn't pull away, but he absolutely didn't look convinced. "What if ourselves isn't what we think it is anymore?" he asked. "What if the thing that came out of that tunnel changed us into something else? Something that just thinks it's still human?" I didn't possess a rational answer for Devon sitting in that dim bar, and the truth is, I still don't. I officially left the Army 2 years after that night near Silver Peak. It wasn't a choice driven by a single event, but a gradual realization that I could no longer function in a world that pretended to be solid. The experience had irreversibly shifted my lens on reality. I couldn't trust the stars, the heavy silence of the desert, or even the brief moments between waking and sleeping. I found myself obsessively watching for lights that pulsed like a human heartbeat and running my fingers over flat metal surfaces, checking for a vibration that shouldn't exist, yet felt more real than anything else. Devin and I stayed in touch for a few years after I left the service. We spoke mostly through brief, guarded phone calls and cryptic emails sent from throwaway accounts. We never addressed the Silver Peak Tunnel directly. It felt too dangerous, like inviting a predator back into our lives simply by speaking its name. But there was a shared weight between us, an unspoken understanding that we were carrying something we weren't meant to have. The last time I heard his voice was in 2011. He called me at 3 a.m. His voice was terrifyingly calm, as if he were reading from a script or speaking from a coordinate located light years away. "They're coming back, Jared," he whispered through the static. "I can see the light outside my window. The same blue-white pulse. They've always been here, watching me. I understand now what they showed us that night. It wasn't a random encounter. It was preparation. They were getting me ready." I desperately asked him, ready for what? But the line went dead. The next morning, I drove 6 hours to his apartment. It was empty. Not just vacant, but systematically erased. No furniture, no clothes, no lingering scent of a person. The landlord swore the unit had been empty for months, even though I had spoken to Devin only hours before. According to official military records, Devin Maddox had been honorably discharged in 2006 and then simply ceased to exist in the system. No address, no tax records, no next of kin. It was like he had been a ghost all along. I've thought about Devin every single day since then. I wonder if he finally found the answers he was hunting for, or if the lights simply came to claim the harvest they had been nurturing since 2003. I spent years researching others, the fisherman in Maine who lost 6 hours, the teacher in Arizona whose students began speaking unknown languages. The pattern is always the same. We are part of a long-term study we never signed up for. Recently, the gaps have returned for me. I lost 4 hours yesterday, waking up in my garage, sitting behind the wheel of my car with the keys in my hand and zero memory of even walking outside. On my dashboard, right where the VIN is stamped into the steel, I saw it. A symbol, a character from an alphabet I've never seen, flawlessly pressed into the metal. It was warm to the touch. It was vibrating at a frequency I could feel in my teeth. Then, this morning, the phone rang. A private number. When I answered, there was only the cold static of an immense, impossible distance. Then, Devin's voice. He sounded older, exhausted, but unmistakably himself. "They found what they were looking for, Jared. In the tunnel. In us. They aren't visitors. They aren't explorers. They're gardeners. And we are the seeds." The connection died before I could even draw a breath to scream. I'm running out of time to exist as Jared Colton. I lost 12 hours today. One moment the sun was rising, the next, it was pitch black. Soon, there won't be any gaps left. There will only be them. I'm writing this and saving it in 3 secure locations because someone needs to know. Someone needs to remember that we weren't crazy. If you ever find yourself on a dark road late at night, if your radio dies and the cold seeps into your bones, and you see a light in the distance that pulses like a heartbeat, run. Don't look back. Don't try to understand it. Just run. Because whatever came out of that tunnel isn't done with humanity yet. The harvest is officially beginning, and I can already feel the light growing outside my window. It's a color that doesn't exist in nature, and it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. My name is Jared Colton. I was a soldier. I was a witness. I was a seed. And now I am finally becoming something else entirely.